Lord of the Mysteries, A Time Traveler in the Fourth Age by Kai Yun-ji. Chapter 234-354. Chapter 234, Tris Cheek. December 28, Tuesday afternoon. Red Rose Manor. Shaw Iyer, wearing an Innsmouth vest, sent Tris Cheek flying with a knee strike followed by a spinning kick. He glanced disdainfully at the demoness-shaped dent in the wall. What class? A mere demoness of pleasure trying to pick a fight with him, a dignified half-god level powerhouse. Do you think adding cheek to your title makes you a true cheek? You actually hit me. Tris clutched her aching lower abdomen, her mind clearing slightly, and looked at the cold-tempered man before her in disbelief. What was wrong with this person? She had just been planning to make a sacrifice. Even if she used to be a man, with such a delicate body, even women would be tempted, right? Long black hair, an oval face, foxy eyes, willow leaf eyebrows, long legs, a gentle and sweet demeanor, pure yet alluring. You actually greeted me with your foot. Tris's expression was somewhat twisted, and the ruthlessness of someone who had scraped by in the streets immediately surfaced. The grace of a demoness. Not quite. Shaw Iyer shook his head lightly. He raised his hand and grabbed, and Tris was suspended in midair. She clutched her neck in pain, her legs flailing weakly. Her two high heels had long since fallen to the floor, and her pearl-like toes, with a warm hue, curled up, pale blue veins clearly visible. HMPH. Shaw Iyer watched Tris struggle in agony. His spirituality was always quite high, and he was sensitive to death. He could make Tris experience the torment of hovering on the brink of death, struggling in pain every second, yet not truly dying. Only when the person he was holding was on the verge of dehydration, her light blue skirt soaked with cold sweat, almost losing control of some primal bodily functions, and beginning to roll her eyes, did Shaw Iyer release his hand. He watched Tris, her eyes hollow, collapse weakly to the ground. Perhaps your recent experience of wantonly provoking low-end nobles and receiving special attention from the witch church has made you forget your identity. For street thugs, when they encounter a weak and exploitable person, they exploit them without bottom line. When they encounter a formidable character they can't afford to offend, they don't hesitate to kneel and apologize, speaking and acting cautiously, observing others, and not making meaningless gestures. Shaw Iyer said as he walked over to Tris, who was still twitching. He continued speaking, not even glancing at the disheveled demoness on the ground. Didn't you do quite well just now? Even if unwilling, to escape the witch church's control, to gain a chance to flee this place early, you were willing to actively approach and tempt me. Now, after being taught a lesson, where does this courage come from to bare your fangs at me? Or is it that the inexplicable confidence accumulated from being a woman during this period has made you somewhat unclear about your potential positioning? He didn't deliver another kick, merely circled casually, then sat back down in his chair, poured himself a cup of black tea, and waited for the demoness on the ground to struggle and slowly get up. Although she had changed her skin, Shaw Iyer hadn't forgotten her true nature. Perhaps being a thug wasn't by choice, but didn't she truly feel joy and satisfaction when she caused a massacre at sea on the first ship? If he would hesitate and doubt himself when bullying Miss Sharon, then dealing with Tris was much simpler. After all, if their positions were reversed, Tris would definitely not show him any mercy, she might even torment him with malicious glee. Isn't this the kind of interaction she prefers? He thought it was acceptable enough. I'm sorry, I was wrong. The near-death experience just now made Tris clearly recall her past hardships and caution. At this moment, her gaze towards Shaw Iyer was filled with fear and reverence, with no trace of hatred or malice. Her voice was somewhat hoarse, and she forced herself to move slowly, using all four limbs, her body still trembling. She kept her head down the entire time, letting her long black hair cover her face, leaving only a wet trail on the floor. It seems you've recalled your past way of survival. Then get up. I have no interest in humiliating you for now. Shaw Iyer looked down. Tris was kneeling on the ground. Although she tried to calm her breathing, it still sounded somewhat heavy. She pushed aside her messy hair, revealing a somewhat pale but still refined face, and forced a fawning smile. Of course, he didn't want cheeks stained with snot or other disgusting things rubbing against his trousers. Fortunately, Triss was quite sensible at this point. She lightly caressed her chest and said with a slight apology, "I overstepped earlier. Please wait a moment. I'll go clean up and then come back to serve you." Triss now realized that her current appearance would not get her any special treatment from Shah Iyer. He had clearly seen many women and didn't think much of her. If she continued to be ignorant, her end would likely not be good. She lowered her head, half bent at the waist, and humbly retreated. Shah Iyer didn't pay much attention to her. You treat people according to who they are, and the same goes for spiritual young girls. After Triss withdrew, Edsack politely knocked on the door and only entered after receiving permission. When he saw the human-shaped dent in the wall, his respect for his teacher deepened even further. "Teacher, the smog accumulated in Backland has reached a critical point. Even without deliberate detonation, a disaster is inevitable. The witch church has already begun preparing to release the plague." Edsack reported the news from the witch church, a hint of helplessness and regret in his eyes. He was, after all, a prince whose heart wasn't hard enough. He truly didn't want something like the Great Smog to happen in Backland, but it seemed unavoidable. If they didn't seize this opportunity, even if the Augustus family was royalty, pushing for reforms in Lowen would face immense resistance. One must know that the Lowen kingdom had been founded for 1,000 years, and the church's power had been rooted in Lowen for 1,000 years. Over these 1,000 years, the core members recruited by the church could not possibly all be royal family members. So, the families, relatives, and positions of the church's middle and high-ranking members in the Lowen kingdom, could they be commoners? Vested interests exist everywhere, and the three churches cannot be anything but vested interests. Reform, even the royal family finds it difficult to take coercive measures against vested interests. There are simply too many things involved. At this time, Edsack's dissatisfaction with the nobles, wealthy merchants, and factory owners actually exceeded that with the witch church, because the witch church was, after all, invited by the Augustus family to cooperate. A Sequence 3 Demoness's plague coverage was only about 15 kilometers, and a Sequence 4 Demoness of Despair's influence was even smaller. Yet now, almost all of Backland was enveloped in smog. Who was truly to blame for this? Chapter 235, The Executioner and the Innocent. The Backland Great Smog. I actually wanted everyone in Backland, regardless of class, to experience this unpleasantness, but this doesn't align with the goddess's teachings. As a believer, I will not defy the goddess's will, nor do I wish to actively spread suffering. So, let Backland remember this day. Remember this lesson. Shah Iyer, having come this far, was very clear about his own nature. His nature was the tradition of his hometown, ordinary common folk who became landlords after rebelling. His mindset shifted very smoothly, without any complex feelings of whether he deserved it or not. At this point, he was also a bit less extreme. As an ordinary person from the old country, he simply had those characteristics, such as believing in his own luck when drawing lots, or inexplicably moonlighting as a strategist giving advice at certain times. Shah Iyer had, of course, reflected. He had considered whether he was unworthy of his position, lowering the standard and average baseline of a true god, or if he was simply a lucky person caught in the tide of the times, carried to a height he couldn't control, liable to fall and die at any moment. Or be completely consumed by the surrounding cold winds. These reflections were all present. After all, it's lonely at the top, and he didn't want to be laughed at by his peers for being an imposter. However, when Shah Iyer truly reached the peak, he found that the people up there weren't exactly proper either. Rosal, a more realistic, transmigrator, predecessor who achieved certain accomplishments, seemed to prove that everyone from the old country had pretty much the same underlying nature. Even if they smiled and said, the taste of a demoness was truly good, did they not watch films in private? Klein's clean, rational lifestyle, not indulging in base desires, seemed more respectable. But Shah Iyer still chose not to learn. Now, he would do whatever he wanted. Since he was already an evil dragon, why bother learning from the heroes, caring about his virtues and burdens? As one of the orchestrators of the Backland Great Smog, he lowered his eyes slightly, calling it a lesson for Backland. His attitude was indeed pride, but what of it? Without truly bringing down a calamity, it wouldn't just be a small lesson. Edsack couldn't discern any complex or compassionate emotions from his teacher's tone. He sighed inwardly, feeling perhaps that he wasn't mature enough, or perhaps that his teacher, like his royal father, was too cold. In the end, he said nothing more, exited the room, and went to attend to his own matters. His responsibility was to stand up and denounce the stubborn elements who obstructed reform when the royal family stepped forward to deal with the chaos, acting as the king's mouthpiece. After all, he was only the third prince and didn't expect any support from those stubborn elements. He just needed to speak from the perspective of the middle class and commoners. As time passed, the demoness of despair, clad in a white robe, appeared on the streets of the East Borough. Above her, the crimson sky was obscured by clouds and mist, making it hazy and dim. Beneath her feet were filthy, disgusting, and foul-smelling streets. Due to the factory owner's final frenzy before the labor and environmental protection laws were enacted, a thick yellow smog permeated every part of Backland. Combined with Backland's local climate, it was cold and damp, making one's throat uncomfortable with just breathing. Even in the East Borough, the streets at night were sparsely populated. The few pedestrians occasionally seen either wore blue masks or covered their mouths and noses with clothes or handkerchiefs, clearly unwilling to inhale this disgusting smog, or rather, air. Hey, even an angel from the church would need to be serious to achieve such an effect. The demoness of despair looked around, a mocking smile on her face. She walked out of the alley and onto the street, her steps slow, as if she were strolling through an ocean of mist. And where she walked, the dark yellow mist seemed to deepen, tinged with a hint of iron black, playing the most terrifying movement for this nightmare. The first death soon occurred. A passing vagrant in a tattered jacket coughed and collapsed to the ground. His life was very simple, a poor beginning. He entered a factory at a very young age. After witnessing his peers, who shared the cramped bunkhouse with him, die one by one, he finally couldn't suppress his fear and fled the factory. In his life thereafter, he engaged in everything: a dock laborer, a petty thief. No job lasted long. Unemployment was as punctual as the bells in the dock district. He entered factories again and fled factories again and again, ultimately choosing to live as a vagrant. Because of this decision, he lived longer than his peers, though still in poverty. The living conditions in the East Borough were very poor. His childhood experience in a sweatshop had long left him with chronic health problems, and lung disease had accompanied him for years. Now, he had fallen. He didn't survive this winter, dying silently, dying in this historical event that would be remembered. Iron black and dark yellow mist intertwined, engulfing the East Borough, engulfing the dock district, engulfing the factory district that continued to emit mist, and constantly spreading to every corner of Backland. Workers died during overtime or in their sleep, ending their lives 1 to 2 years early, ending their fate of never escaping the factory. One by one, the poor felt unwell. One by one, the vagrants showed expressions of terror. The demoness of despair showed no emotion, even though she had once been one of them. She merely glanced regretfully in the direction of the Empress Borough and the West Borough, regretting that her abilities were limited. The factory district, where the smog was heaviest, was far from those noble and wealthy areas, preventing her from immediately spreading the calamity to those who were enjoying themselves or about to do so. The three churches, after all, reacted a beat too late. The visibility in Backland was too poor, and the demoness's plague spread mixed within the smog, preventing them from reacting immediately. But they would eventually react. Because at this moment, people like Zio Derecha, Sherlock Moriarty, and Audrey Hall were using their channels to transmit dangerous signals to the various churches. Upon receiving the news, the churches would immediately report it to the Archbishop stationed there, seeking ways to resolve the problems encountered. My hands are also stained with the blood of the innocent. Shah-Ir stood by the window, looking at the faint crimson light that shone on his hands through the haze. Was this considered getting his hands dirty? He could have clearly chosen not to participate, or to stand purely on the side of justice, preventing all of this. Night always brings sorrow. Before the new storm arrives, it must be time for dawn, right? Shah-Ir withdrew his hand, seeing a golden sun rise in the sky, which had just entered night. Golden sunlight pierced through the thick haze, carrying divine and purifying power. Chapter 236, Straw. No, it's weeds. This was light. Sacred and warm light illuminated Backland, which was shrouded in a thick fog. On the streets and inside houses, people who had been coughing suddenly felt much better after being exposed to the sunlight. In an apartment in the East Borough, the quilt lay messily on the floor, and old Kohler coughed with difficulty, wearing a mask. He cursed the Backland weather in his heart. If there hadn't been absolutely no work in the countryside, he would have truly wanted to move back to his small house, tending to the rented lands belonging to the nobles, dealing with those greedy rent collectors, and never coming to this prosperous yet filthy city. However, headaches, fever, chest tightness, and throat discomfort, these symptoms were constantly eroding his consciousness. Damn it, these hateful. Old Kohler suppressed his headache and nausea, feeling breathless at the thought of throwing all his savings into the hospital. But he quickly lost that concern. Perhaps his throat was blocked by thick phlegm, and the sharp pain from his lungs in his chest made him realize that death might soon arrive. In a trance, he seemed to see his small house in the countryside, the golden fields, and the lush green forests. He tremblingly reached out and bit into the smoked ham he had bought at great expense. This ham had originally carried all his hopes for the new year. He had even decided to savor each slice of ham with bread, but now, he mechanically chewed the ham, which still had a hint of white. His physical senses were already somewhat blurred, his chewing was exceptionally weak, and the long-awaited ham tasted of nothing, neither meaty nor salty, everything that could be called good was imperceptible. All he could perceive was bitterness and pain. At least, I tasted my New Year's gift. Ha ha, when I die, who knows which rats will benefit from my ham and savings. He couldn't understand why, despite carefully wearing a mask and reducing his outings, he, a healthy man, would suddenly fall ill. He thought of his wife and children who had died of the plague, and of his neighbors who had died in factories for various reasons. He recalled the grumbling of a drunkard in a tavern. People like us are like straw in the fields. A gust of wind will knock us down, and even without wind, we might fall on our own. In the end, old Kohler did not wait for the wind, but for the sunlight that illuminated the earth. Golden light shone into the oppressive, coffin-like rental room. The sacred power purified old Kohler's plague infection. The thick, glue-like phlegm blocking his throat dissolved, and his weak chewing gradually regained strength. The unique meaty aroma of cured ham spread, and his mouth no longer tasted only bitterness and despair. The old man struggled to get up from the floor. Looking at the deformed ham he had gnawed, he ignored the joy of surviving and instead let out a scream of immense heartache. Damn it! What a stupid thing I've done. This is several days' worth. Judging by the powerful scream, the gentleman's body was indeed as healthy as he had always prided himself on. Similarly, seeing the golden sunlight replace the reddish moonlight, Shah-Ir tapped his fingers on the windowsill, a slight smile on his lips, uttering a low murmur that was either a sigh or a helpless remark. These are not straw that fall with a gust of wind, they are clearly weeds growing wantonly in the wilderness. No matter how difficult the living environment, they stubbornly take root and grow. And what they need, perhaps, is just to part the thick fog and let some golden sunlight shine through. If there is also the nourishment of rain, they can live even better. They may be lowly, they may be fragile, and the value of their lives may be like insects that live and die in a day. But as humans, how can one not see that silent persistence and strength? Shah-Ir could feel the number of casualties rapidly decreasing after the ruined royal family used that Sun Pathway Sequence 0 sealed artifact. And by the time the somewhat sluggish Storm Church reacted and gathered a terrifying hurricane, the people affected by the smog were in a better state. The Sequence 3 Sea King was still very powerful. The whooshing sound of the wind was like a typhoon passing through. The accumulated fog was dispersed, and the dense, dark yellow and iron black quickly faded. The smoke in the East Borough and the factory district thinned, losing its medium for transmission, and the spread of pollution was naturally affected. Boom, boom, lightning flashed, thunder roared, and pouring rain began to cleanse the earth. Shah-Ir opened the window, looking at the heavy rain washing away the filth outside, and shook his head with some boredom. Couldn't this have been done? Since you can see it, wouldn't it have been better to disperse this long accumulated smog a while ago? Isn't a pale yellow city disgusting to look at? Shah-Ir didn't really want to comment on the saint stationed at the Holy Wind Cathedral. Where's your arrogance on the sea? Aren't you quite capable on land too? Hee, how would those people think of such things? The Storm Church never thought about it, so how could they have conceived of it? The demoness of despair, Panacea, dressed in a plain white robe, appeared in the room, mockingly saying without concealment. In front of such a heavy fog, without corresponding protection, the middle class and the wealthy are also lambs to the slaughter. It's a pity we had to cooperate with the royal family's actions, otherwise, if the smog had spread a little longer, I would have heard the desperate wails of those fat pigs. Panacea said, licking her lips with some intoxication. It was clear that on her way, under the cover of the heavy smog, she had also done a few side businesses and earned some pocket money. Perhaps, in the eyes of the witch church, the wealth accumulated by those rich people was saved for them. Because Triss had no chance to escape, did the Mother of the Sky simply not come out? Shah-Ir glanced at Panacea, who was still lively and hadn't been punished by being locked in a small dark room, and felt that the Evernight goddess was indeed not that idle to interfere in this human farce. You are. Panacea looked at Triss, who stood in the corner, dressed in a maid's dress, quietly making no sound, and somewhat doubted whether the demoness in front of her was an impostor. Where was that somewhat impulsive, restless demoness of pleasure? Who was this well-behaved, respectful maid? How did you train her? This demigod, who had been tormented by her predecessors and was also enthusiastic about tormenting newcomers, became somewhat interested. As for the fact that Triss was actually a treasure of the witch church, a vessel for the primordial demoness's descent, Panacea selectively ignored it. Isn't the person still fine, without losing a single piece of flesh? She is quite self-aware. Triss, Marquise's black tea. Shah-Ir offered no explanation for this. Chapter 237, The Villains of East Borough. Backland, Empress Borough. Inside the Hall family's luxurious villa. Audrey Hall had just changed into her pajamas, intending to sleep, when she was woken by Susie's barks. Heaven help her, after learning to speak human language for so long, Susie had actually reverted to dog speak. Though, the crimson light in her mind, and the voice from Mr. Fool, were equally attention-grabbing. Audrey looked at her golden retriever, bewildered. Although Susie had successfully learned Runus, Audrey had never learned the special language for hounds. Audrey, look outside. Susie anxiously bit the curtain, pulling it wide open so that the noble young lady could clearly see the thick, heavy mist on the horizon, like dark clouds pressing down on the city. Susie, I think I already know what you're warning me about. Audrey didn't waste time. She put on a shawl and quickly walked to her parents' bedroom, knocking on the door to convey her worries to Earl Hall, and hoping that Earl Hall would immediately dispatch the family's beyonders to St. Samuel Cathedral to deliver the message. At this moment, there were many kind-hearted people going to deliver messages to the Orthodox churches, such as a certain Mr. Fool who stayed up late. When he noticed the spreading mist in East Borough, besides using his identity as a steam church informant to send messages, he suddenly thought of Marich, the zombie from Braveheart's bar. Zombie. He probably isn't afraid of mist. However, before the Orthodox churches began to act, East Borough was actually more lively than many people imagined. Although East Borough was essentially the slum of Backland, precisely because of this, Backland's East Borough was such a mixed bag. For example, cultists, spies from various countries, onshore personnel of various pirates, whether official organizations or secret organizations. Anyone who could achieve a certain level would definitely establish a small stronghold in Backland. Even if these people didn't necessarily live in East Borough, to evade some investigations and plan certain operations, East Borough harbored a considerable number of Beyonders. Even gangs like the Black Skull Party had Beyonders from the death pathway within them. The plague caused by the demoness of despair was widespread. Even low-sequence Beyonders, if they did nothing and came into contact with this plague, would at most last a bit longer than ordinary people. And so, a dignified demigod personally went fishing, and indeed fished out some unlucky Beyonders active in East Borough. This included Miss Alice, who was recently taking advantage of the night church's free night school to diligently learn a foreign language. This was Shaw Eyre's idea. Anyway, the night church's free night school was free, and the courses were simple. Learning a foreign language might lead to a career as a military attaché at an embassy or other professional paths in the future. When the Great Mist broke out, Alice stopped her classmates who were worried about their families, helped the night school teachers maintain order, then turned and slipped out, tugging at her hair in a conflicted manner. Finally, she sighed helplessly, put on her hood, and walked towards the more remote and impoverished streets. The lantern she held in her hand emitted a glow imbued with sacred energy. Backland Comprehensive Affairs Service Company. Shaw Eyre had casually leveled up the Revenant account to demigod. This wasn't difficult in principle, normal advancement certainly couldn't achieve it, but he could strengthen the alt account according to the logic of upgrading and crafting humanoid sealed artifacts. The corresponding theoretical foundation and knowledge reserves were also not an issue. The mutant pathway has strong poison resistance. A revenant can directly immunity physical toxins. There's no reason a puppet would be poisoned to death by a demoness's joking attempt at poisoning. The puppet, Shaw Eyre's spirituality spread out, beginning to absorb the plague from the surrounding few blocks, reducing its concentration, allowing the East Borough residents who had paid him protection money to hold out until the impending sunlight and rain. At this time, some secret organizations' covert agents would also step in to protect the believers they had developed. This was an opportunity, a chance to display power and deepen the faith of believers. Not all Beyonders were averse to doing things incidentally. Thus, scattered points of light maintained the vitality of various blocks before the sun rose. Even so, the number of people who died in the Great Mist was still enough for the demoness of despair to complete the digestion of her Sequence 4 potion. The Ruin royal family achieved what they wanted. The Witch Church also fulfilled its demands. This should be considered a satisfactory cooperation for both parties. Shaw Eyre said, the deathly aura around him gradually receding. It looked as if, through this massacre, he had digested the Sequence 4 undying potion. His spirituality became more controllable, and the coldness of the dead greatly diminished. The Ruin royal family probably didn't shortchange you on your reward either. Panatia covered her mouth and chuckled. She was in a good mood. As long as this mission was completed, she would receive priority for a Beyonder characteristic to advance to Sequence 3 Demoness of Undying. One should know that within the Witch Church, competition among those above demigod was much fiercer than in the Night Church. How many angels and saints did the Night Church have in total? The Witch Church alone had at least 9 Sequence 3 Demoness of Undying. After advancing to Sequence 3 Demoness of Undying, eternal youth and the ability to resurrect through a mirror person were probably the ultimate dreams in the heart of every ambitious demoness. You can take the person. Shaw Eyre took a sip of black tea, without any thought of switching accounts to kill the demoness of despair before him. If it weren't for the abundance of undead in the underworld, Shaw Eyre would have to thank Panatia for helping him refine the 10,000 soul banner. Time is a bit tight this time. I need to take Triss away early. If there's a chance, let's make another appointment next time. I'll keep you good company then. Panatia gave Shaw Eyre a flying kiss, then took Triss and left through the mirror world. Triss was quiet throughout, probably intending to get her revenge after advancing to demigod. Shaw Eyre paid a little attention and found that the Night Church's old schemer hadn't launched a surprise attack on these two, low sequence, demonesses, probably either looking down on them or lacking sufficient motivation. Although there was no clear empirical evidence, he knew that the Evernight goddess's attention was probably all on him. Klein should also have some favor. Shah-Ir wasn't focused on Klein, his current focus was on his good student, Edsack. This third prince was currently full of fighting spirit, intending to clearly state the pros and cons, criticize current policies, and plead for the people at the cabinet meeting. Shah-Ir, however, felt that the third prince was quite handsome, and it would be a pity if he didn't hold a protest march. Chapter 238. This is precisely why he is king. Wednesday, December 29. Prince Edsack was unable to make the grand carriage entrance to the cabinet as he had envisioned. He was compelled by his tutor to ride a white horse straight from East Borough along Central Avenue to the cabinet, located in Empress Borough. On either side of him were his retainers and knights, including true knights and some noble youths he had recruited, such as riding instructor Talum. Some scions of noble families followed closely behind, holding a large, unfurled banner. There were many such banners, each with different slogans. Some were new party slogans advocating for atmospheric environmental protection, others were conservative party slogans benefiting the people, and even more were slogans calling for improved working conditions, reasonable working hours and rest systems, and minimum wage standards. Shah-Ir had adopted an inconspicuous appearance, blending into the parade like a minor character. He, too, held a banner demanding an 8-hour workday. This, to some extent, violated political and spoken rules and had not been discussed with the ruined royal family beforehand. The original plan was for Edsack to go to the cabinet and speak out, and it remained so. However, Shah-Ir had arranged an additional scene. Driven by an unmentionable sentiment, he even personally followed behind Edsack, holding a banner. Not shouting slogans was the last stubbornness of this procession. Just yesterday, a heavy smog had erupted, claiming countless lives. In the early morning, people's eyes still held a sense of bewilderment and sorrow. They were about to numbly return to their tedious work, but the appearance of Edsack's procession stirred something unclear and ineffable in their eyes. Prestige, reputation, these were real things. Edsack's previous actions of repeatedly attacking various policies had already garnered him considerable goodwill. Even if it seemed somewhat like an opposition party criticizing the ruling party for being unfilial. But Edsack's identity was that of the third prince of the Loan Kingdom, the esteemed Earl Rustin. His surname was inherently a symbol of legitimacy, and his banner inherently represented righteousness. At this moment, this handsome prince, riding a white horse, leading his banner and attendants, and raising the will of the people as he advanced towards Empress Borough, towards the cabinet, and towards Sadrak Palace, was itself a sign of an unstoppable trend. More and more commoners in East Borough stopped to watch. Some commoners who had lost loved ones yesterday temporarily abandoned their work for the new day and silently, somberly, from a distance, followed behind Edsack's procession. And the Loan third prince's expression at this moment was incomparably solemn and heavy. His face was originally so stiff because he was coerced by his tutor and felt somewhat at a loss, so he could only maintain a stern face and bite the bullet to do this. But now, as he noticed the growing crowd behind him, the prince's hand gripping the reins involuntarily tightened. At this point, Edsack felt a heavy burden. Even if someone from the royal family came to stop him, Edsack wasn't particularly inclined to halt. Compared to the original plan of a simple political struggle, he now seemed to be carrying something. He seemed to have staked his reputation on this matter. As a prince disliked by his father, considered weak and indecisive, Edsack truly felt the weight of it at this moment. He slightly turned his head and glanced behind him. When he saw his tutor following behind him, he genuinely breathed a sigh of relief, because as they progressed from East Borough to Empress Borough, the number of commoners coming to watch or join increased, and he was now somewhat unable to bear the pressure, fearing that the situation would get out of his control. Fortunately, the worst did not happen. The Augustus royal family did not send anyone to obstruct or warn Edsack. And along the way, none of the patrolling police dared to stop the procession led by the third prince. The Loan nobles, who had received the news in advance, were initially extremely angry, feeling that Edsac had abandoned the honor of being a noble. They fumed, they shouted, and they demanded an immediate end to this absurd farce. However, their officials remained silent, and when they actually saw the procession, these nobles, the most distinguished and eloquent in the Loan kingdom, also fell silent, choosing not to speak. What kind of procession was that? The dense crowd stretched endlessly. These people were mournful, suppressed, and expectant. The long procession was without any disturbance. Everyone spontaneously followed behind Edsac's banner. They did not speak, made no unnecessary movements, but simply lowered their heads, silently advancing towards Empress Burrow, which was almost a different world from theirs. This was a sorrowful army. Yesterday's heavy smog had left all Backland residents in a state of pain and bewilderment. These people were following the offspring of King George III of Loan. Shah Eyre Maynard, who lived in West Borough, even took off his night church priest's robe, using a wooden stick to hold up his robe as a banner, and followed behind Prince Edsac. As a deacon of the night church, although he was not qualified to represent the church, he had the right to represent himself. This garment was a manifestation of his resolve. Such an action surprised Edsac, but he had no time to think much now, as they were getting closer and closer to the palace. And Shah Eyre merely exchanged glances with his separated, small account, subordinate responsible for guiding the parade, then both silently went about their business. Sometimes, Shah Eyre also agreed with Justice's view that one should not be too radical in doing things. Therefore, this was merely the personal action of the Loan third prince, and everyone else was just, quietly watching the excitement. This wouldn't be considered radical, would it? Shah Eyre's action seemed to be a signal. An old Storm Church member following behind the procession, inspired and moved, did not hesitate much. He took off his Storm Church priest's robe, found a wooden stick, and held up the Storm Church robe. This was just the beginning. The clergy of the Church of Machinery, who had the most contact with factories, also, for their own interests and the interests of the church, took off their clerical robes at this time, holding these garments, which once represented sanctity, high above their heads. This scene made the eyelids of the nobles watching from the high platforms twitch wildly. Both the Conservative Party and the New Party were uncharacteristically silent. The measures originally planned to intercept or disperse the crowd seemed to have all lost their meaning at this moment. Isn't the royal family going to do anything? Lord Aguhid Nigan, from the Conservative Party, and Earl Hall, one of the leaders of the new party, exchanged glances, both seeing deep helplessness and headaches in each other's eyes. Chapter 239, What's in the Bones? Empress Burrow, Sir Drac Palace. George III, wearing a crown, with a solemn face and a small mustache, sat on his throne, looking at the two noble representatives who had entered with the Earl of the traveling palace, Lord Aguhid Nigan, the Conservative Party's noble representative, and Earl Hall, the new party's noble representative. King. The two great nobles bowed to George III, their attitudes respectful. They had clearly come to proactively seek his instructions. Although these nobles had the ability to persuade the church to cooperate with certain actions, under such public scrutiny, could the three Orthodox churches still recall the lower-ranking clergy who had been emotionally affected? What about the church's glorious image? They still had some face to uphold, after all. The corners of George III's mouth curved upwards almost imperceptibly the moment these nobles bowed, but his expression quickly sobered, as if the previous smile had been merely an illusion. Edsac is indeed a bit too ostentatious, George III said with authority. Prime Minister Aguhid and Earl Hall remained silent. Sure enough, the king immediately began to reprimand him. He's so old, yet he still acts so rashly. He's almost completely disgraced the royal family. A father scolding his son. The two very tactful noble representatives below were still about to offer the king some advice, speaking a few good words on Edsac's behalf. And after the superficial formalities were complete, George III lightly coughed and began to instruct the cabinet on their work. The two noble representatives, of course, respectfully and humbly sought guidance. Outside Serdrak Palace, Prince Edsak's attendants blocked the parade on a square. By then, the procession had grown quite large, and news had long spread. Countless Lonis had rushed over to watch the spectacle, and many members of the Tarot Club were present, such as Furs, who had been pulled along by Zio. And also a certain great detective, mingling in the crowd. Klein looked at the endless crowd, his heart already pounding. An excessive gathering of people could lead to riots, and if things went wrong, it could backfire, causing even greater chaos. One must remember, this was a world with Beyonder powers. Now, he could only hope that these people would remain calm, and that Loan's officials would quickly provide a response to end this sudden parade. The fluttering robes of the clergy, supported by various objects and held high above their heads, made his eyelids twitch wildly. As a former Nighthawk, he was certain that this was absolutely not the church's idea. He wasn't entirely sure how Loan's upper echelons would handle this matter, or how the church would view it. He also didn't want these commoners to be manipulated and used, becoming tools for ambitious individuals to achieve their goals and the price they had to pay. Rosal's deeds had already served as a precedent for other royal families. The noble classes of the various nations on the north and south continents were absolutely unwilling to see commoners gather to cause trouble. If this Prince Edsak can truly, as he claims, secure better conditions for the commoners of Loan, and prevent the situation from escalating, calming it down instead, then that would be a good thing. Otherwise, it will be these poor people at the bottom who suffer. Klein sighed slightly. His abilities were limited, and he could only observe everything from the sidelines, while also being vigilant against anyone in the crowd taking advantage of the situation to cause trouble and create greater chaos. This Prince Edsak's intentions are certainly not that simple either. His mood was somewhat complex. On one hand, he was reluctant to see the middle and lower classes consumed and fooled like tools. On the other hand, he felt this might be an opportunity. Doing this with Loan's prince would be safer. And then, he was somewhat worried about today's events. Even if this parade achieved substantial progress, it would mostly be due to various political reasons. The commoners' parade was merely a catalyst, not the actual dominant factor. If these commoners failed to understand this later, and thought that any problem could be solved through parades, it would only lead to senseless bloodshed and violence, achieving no substantive effect. Various complex emotions surfaced. Klein was both expectant and worried, and he watched this scene, which would undoubtedly be written into history, with a sense of forgetfulness. On the other side, Audrey also stood on her villa's balcony, watching the distant scene through a telescope. Beside her, her brother, Hibbert Hall, looked into the distance with a somewhat displeased expression, feeling that the appearance of these commoners at this time was just a hindrance and a bother. In his eyes, dealing with the aftermath of the Great Smog was the most important thing. These people should not have jumped out at this time to disrupt their cleanup efforts. What made him even more uncomfortable was that, although he was somewhat annoyed by this somewhat coercive behavior, he could do nothing about it. The power of the common people, at this moment, seemed to show just a tiny bit. Although the name of Loan's third prince, and those tricolored clerical robes held high, were the true key for these silent forces to manifest. How magnificent! It was Audrey's first time seeing such a scene, but she noticed her brother's inexplicable irritation, so she only quietly exclaimed. At this moment, Shah Iyer, who was the first to take off his clothes and raise a flag, had already put his clothes back on. Then, he found an opportunity to slip away, change out of the black and red clerical robe, put on traditional noble attire, and watch the show from his own balcony. If he remembered correctly, in the original timeline, Edsak colluded with the Witch Church to create the Backland Great Smog, and the three great churches forced George III's hand. The compromise George III offered was to meet some of the new party's demands, including relaxing election restrictions, appeasing bankers and factory owners, and enacting relevant laws for environmental protection and minimum guarantees, reforming the poor law as per the church's needs, and allowing the three great churches to send personnel into the military. This time, the commoners also participated in the forced abdication. So as long as the forced abdication, succeeds, we should be able to gain some more benefits. Shah Iyer actually felt that such actions were not radical enough. He didn't have a strong demand for money and land, so he didn't have deep thoughts about hanging nobles. But finding every excessively polluting factory huge sums of money, essentially digging into their flesh and blood, was quite interesting. This time it's still not radical enough. The commoners might not yet realize the power of unity, and the nobles won't truly bleed heavily. But it's still early, there's a long way to go. At least I've confirmed that deep down, I'm still an old Chinese person, and what I habitually do is the harvesting the middle class routine. Shah Iyer was truly amused by himself. What the hell was a mystical noble? What was it to target these so-called nobles? Resisting the ruling class. Punching hard. This was just harvesting merchants. Chapter 240 Melissa's New Look. The Backland Great Smog incident was completely over. After consulting with George III and the cabinet members, it was decided that a special fund would be allocated to assist ordinary people whose bodies and properties were violated during the Great Smog incident. This money was directly transferred to the three major churches. Therefore, the ordinary clergy who took off their clothes to support the parade did not receive much reprimand from the church. The church merely arranged more work for these impulsive young people. At this time, all the almshouses were also operating, carrying out comforting and relief work for the believers. Even though some unpleasant things happened in Backland, the New Year's Eve party still could not be cancelled. Shah Iyer, dressed in a formal suit, entered the banquet hall with his nominal mother, Lady Maynard, and found a suitable viewing spot. He watched the Queen take Miss Audrey Hall's hand and walk step by step to the high platform, introducing this officially adult noble lady to all the guests attending the party. Although this is Backland's rainy day, we have enough experience to cope with such weather, and we also have a gem bright enough to illuminate the entire city. Her beauty, her wisdom, her character, and her etiquette are all impeccable. I formally introduce her to you, Miss Audrey Hall. The Queen smiled and displayed the pearl beside her. Shah Iyer joined the crowd in benevolent applause. The sound of fireworks exploding outside the window seemed to dispel the gloom that enveloped the city, bringing some colors of the new year. He scanned the earrings Audrey was wearing, the sparkling necklace around her neck, and her other glittering jewelry, and had to admit that she was indeed a gem monster. Is she that beautiful? Hai Ruer, who had snuck over, noticed that Shah Iyer's attention was all on Audrey. She couldn't help but complain a little, with a hint of jealousy. Although she was unwilling, she was indeed not as dazzling as Audrey. Beauty is a relative concept. But she is indeed the protagonist tonight. Shah Iyer held Hai Ruer's hand and said casually, watching Miss Hall begin to dance in the ballroom. It was Audrey's luck to coincide with her coming-of-age ceremony in the social scene. Let go of my hand. Hai Ruer's face flushed slightly, and she no longer paid attention to Audrey, struggling symbolically for a moment. What do you think of the moonlight tonight? Shah Iyer looked down and smiled faintly, his eyes like smoke rising from a blue sea, asking an unrelated question. Very, very gentle. Hai Ruer felt her heart beating a little fast. She tilted her head slightly and said, feigning composure. Indeed, people's joys and sorrows are not interconnected. It was the new year, and perhaps there were 3 place settings on the table at the Moretti's house far away in Tingen. Although I can't see it. Let's go, let's dance. Shah Iyer led Hai Ruer into the ballroom, mingling at the New Year's Eve party of the nobles, experiencing this prosperous and lively atmosphere. It was a new year, and everyone was striving to live. January 3, 1350, Monday. Shah Iyer got out of bed, feeling that his morality was finally a little better since he hadn't taken advantage of Dun. If he had really intended to poach someone, he probably would have gone to the neighboring field to help with some farm work, hoeing and loosening the soil, taking advantage of the New Year's atmosphere a couple of days ago. Although formalities are meaningless, it's still good to pay a little attention. Shah Iyer glanced at Mai Gao-usi, who was wrapped around him like an octopus. Mai Gao-usi opened his eyes, his golden hair falling down. He stretched out his fair arm to help him straighten his clothes, but Shah Iyer stopped him. There's nothing to do today, you can sleep a little longer. Shah-Ir gently patted Maigausi's head. Maigausi narrowed his eyes as if enjoying it, then burrowed back into the covers, hiding his smooth, fair skin. Today, Mr. Fool was going to sea to be his legendary hunter. Shah-Ir recalled the sea map and felt that there was nothing worth noting along the way. Except for Band Sea, which might be a bit dangerous, but most people wouldn't encounter that kind of danger. He didn't lie in bed, mainly planning to welcome Miss Melissa, the mysterious younger sister who was about to arrive in Backland. Meanwhile, at the steam train station, Klein, who had also changed his skin, watched with slightly disheveled breathing as his older brother and younger sister were taken away by Shah-Ir. This neat-haired, deep brown-eyed young gentleman now really wanted to send a dream to Leonard, asking Leonard to keep an eye on his sister. Benson too, coming to Backland for the first time, how could he be so easily led away by someone? Even if Shah-Ir was wearing a cleric's robe, it wasn't acceptable. At this moment, Klein didn't even want to go to sea anymore. On the other side, Shah-Ir was introducing some of the night church's benefits to Benson. For family members of fallen personnel, the church could also provide some good housing options. He didn't mention his offline classmate Klein, as that would be somewhat hurtful. He only said he was a friend of Serena Wood, although both Moretus knew his identity. Shah-Ir took the two to St. Samuel Cathedral for a brief tour, then took them to see a rental house on Painsfield Street, a small residence suitable for 2 or 3 people. "Thank you so much, Mr. Maynard." Benson thanked Shah-Ir. The owner of this house was a priest of the night church, and Benson knew how lucky it was to find a reliable landlord. Melissa also politely thanked him, following her brother. "If you want to thank me, then you might as well praise the goddess directly." Shah-Ir smiled. "Although it's a bit presumptuous, may I be a little impolite?" He showed Benson and Melissa the white gloves he was wearing. "Of course, sir." Although Benson was puzzled, he didn't think too much. While he had a fair amount of vigilance, he wasn't so suspicious as to doubt everything he saw. "In that case, thank you very much." Shah-Ir didn't stand on ceremony and immediately began to handle Melissa, styling Melissa's somewhat ordinary hairstyle into the cute and fashionable sister cut he had seen in anime. Melissa was clearly a bit unaccustomed to this situation, but she wasn't overly fearful. After all, Shah-Ir was wearing gloves and maintained an appropriate distance, merely tidying her hair. She glanced at Benson, who gently shook his head, apparently still maintaining a certain trust in Shah-Ir after their trip to St. Samuel Cathedral. "This hairstyle looks more suitable for Backland." After adjusting it, Shah-Ir handed a small cosmetic mirror to Melissa, then looked at Benson, giving him a look, waiting for his brother's evaluation. "Although a bit flashy, she is indeed cuter." Benson, of course, affirmed his sister's new look. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 241, Marrying the Princesses. Monday, January 3rd, afternoon. Above the familiar gray mist, the number of people on both sides of the bronze long table finally became symmetrical. The Fool was at the head, the World at the foot, and 3 ladies or gentlemen on each side. Audrey, of course, noticed the new member, the Moon, but at this moment, her thoughts on the Great Smog incident overshadowed her curiosity about the new member. Not just Audrey, but Alger and Furs also remembered Angel's reminder at the last Tarot Club meeting. Perhaps because the number of casualties was controlled, and subsequent protests diverted some attention, everyone's reaction at this time was relatively calm. After all, they didn't know that this might also involve deities. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." "Good afternoon, Angel." Audrey still greeted them as usual, though her tone lacked some of its usual cheerfulness. Angel. The Moon, Emlyn, was startled by the address. There was no angel in the tarot cards. There was actually an angel in the Tarot Club. This was a big shot comparable to a Duke Sanguine. With that preconceived notion, Emlyn looked in Angel's direction. No matter how he looked, he felt that Angel was unfathomable, a towering figure, with an extraordinary demeanor. Angel, your prophecy was very accurate. Audrey thought for a moment and still used prophecy to describe it. He, not thinking of this point as underestimating the professionalism of the Witch Church. The Witch Church is also a top-tier secret organization. Shaw felt that he could guess there was a problem even without foreknowledge. Miss Justice paused, unsure how to respond. She genuinely hadn't realized the problem beforehand. The others were the same. Shaw's words inadvertently hurt all members of the Tarot Club except Emlyn. The disaster, to a certain extent, promoted the growth of the Loan Kingdom. Without this smog, who knows how long it would have taken for those welfare bills to be proposed. Without that protest, who knows how long those welfare bills would have been stuck in the upper and lower houses. When the number of workers pouring into Backland is large enough, these proposals will be indefinitely extended, and welfare bills not explicitly written into law are meaningless. Shaw spoke of some opinions from Benson, the prospective civil servant, during their chats. In reality, certain things had already formed a consensus. There was no humanitarianism. When there were too many people, they became worthless. If the royal family weren't so unwilling to concede, I would even suspect that the protest was orchestrated by the royal family themselves. It's truly hard to imagine that the third prince of the Augustus family would pressure the cabinet and the upper and lower houses in such a flamboyant manner. He must have considerable support behind him, perhaps the new party. Alger's intuition remained sharp. If not for being limited by stereotypes, he would have almost guessed correctly. The new party might have some cooperation with EDSAC, but the new party definitely didn't receive prior notice. Otherwise, Father wouldn't have such a complicated expression. Audrey silently grumbled in her heart. These people casually chatted about some current issues in Backland, then tacitly fell silent. Respected Mr. Fool, I have received 3 more pages of Rosal's diary. Furs began to hand over Rosal's diary. Attending a banquet also requires handing over Rosal. Wait, is that a diary? The Moon, Emlyn, looked blankly at Mr. Fool, very confused as to why Mr. Fool hadn't mentioned it before. Did you give me a chance to introduce it then? Mr. Fool pretended not to see this big moon. He began to read Rosal's diary in his hand. February 21st, today I learned a secret of the Sauron family. It turns out that their hunter pathway forcibly changes gender at sequence 4, ha ha ha, I'm dying of laughter. No wonder none of the high sequence beyonders of the Sauron family I know are women, ha ha. What kind of Iron Man pathway is this? Maybe the ancestors of the Sauron family weren't even men to begin with. Wait, if it forcibly changes gender at sequence 4, then the Count Champagne who wanted to contend with me, damn it. Is homosexuality in Intis led by the Intis royal family? The Savon pathway wouldn't be so treacherous at high sequences, would it? It definitely can't be. I remember there are female high-ranking members in the church. Just by reading the diary, Klein could tell that Emperor Rosal, after half-jokingly gloating, suddenly suspected that the gay man who wanted to contend with him might have previously been a mature and beautiful red-haired older sister, and also an important member of the royal family. That vague, complex feeling. This kind of, I am indeed a transmigrator, and as a transmigrator, I should marry the princess, but the princess was forcibly gender-bent, and she still seems to have a thing for me. Damn it, kind of feeling. Unable to accept men who were once women, unable to accept women who were once men. The hunter pathway and the demoness pathway are truly designed to mess with people's minds. Klein vaguely speculated that the 2 gender-bending pathways could be interchangeable, but one changes gender at sequence 4, and the other at sequence 7. This incongruous, asymmetrical sense of fragmentation once again made him feel a sense of distortion and madness, even making him suspect that the underlying logic of this world was madness and chaos. February 12, this time seeing Florent, I'm actually a little relieved that this guy is a man. If he were a woman, I might not have been able to refuse his recruitment so completely back then. Who knows, there might have been a series of stories with her, just like in those transmigration novels, where the protagonist gradually gains the attention and favor of a royal maiden through his intelligence and wit. PFF'd. If I were to advance to sequence 4, I'd probably achieve a happy ending, and then this guy would change gender to a man. If he still had feelings for me, wouldn't I die of depression? PFF'd. Klein almost laughed out loud. From a later perspective, he clearly understood that the Emperor's relief was well-founded. If Mr. Florent had indeed been a woman, then the subsequent development might have been as the Emperor described. Before Sequence 4, the Emperor would have been full of enthusiasm. After Sequence 4, it would have been the hunter's turn to sharpen his knife. December 25, the improved artillery I designed and supervised was completed. It's hard to imagine that in a world with extraordinary powers, technological development is so backward. Even I, a liberal arts student who worked in sales after graduation, can scour my mind and come up with some technologies that surpass this era. Once these cannons are in place, the Loan Kingdom's maritime dominance might not be unchallenged. The existence of Beander powers hinders the development of natural science. Klein felt this was like the wizarding world in Harry Potter. What respectable warlock would have Godric's Hollow in their left hand and an American draw in their right? Only wizards without talent would study Muggle things. Of course, Your Majesty. I'm not saying you don't have talent, Klein added in his heart. Chapter 242, Red Priest. May 5, that unspeakable organization held another secret gathering. At first, I was highly vigilant about this method of pulling people in through dreams. This way of participating in gatherings as a spirit body didn't seem like something legitimate people would organize. This not only means that we might have no secrets before the convener of the gathering, but also that we might constantly face the threat of this organization. If withdrawing wasn't even more dangerous, I actually didn't want to participate in such a gathering at all, even if I could see the second blasphemy slate here. Since I couldn't resist, I could only actively integrate. I began to ask some questions I was interested in. For example, the names of those Sequence 0s recorded on the blasphemy slate all sounded appropriate for their status, but only Red Priest seemed unique, feeling like it was missing something. At this point, the old gentleman sitting beside me told me that Red refers to the red of war, and priest can be understood as the sacrificer of the essence of power. Someone objected to him, saying that the word priest in Red Priest refers to the priest of the original creator. I was more inclined to the former, so I quietly asked the name of the old gentleman beside me. He told me that his name was Hermes. Oh my goodness, Hermes, who created ancient Hermes, the founder of human mysticism. I looked at him with some uncertainty, but Hermes didn't admit it. His demeanor was very calm, as if he hadn't achieved anything great, just an ordinary old man. It turns out that true masters really have a humble heart. Compared to Hermes, I, who am so proud after achieving only a meager accomplishment, am indeed still too young. Even the great emperor had moments of humility. Klein smiled, but he could also understand. After all, this was Hermes, an ancient powerhouse active in the Second Epoch, appearing in human history even earlier than the god of combat and the Earth Mother. He personally experienced the thorny path of humanity's ancestors experimenting on themselves, step by step seeking Beander powers. And based on giant language, standing on the shoulders of generations of ancestors, he innovatively invented a set of Beander language belonging to humanity, ancient Hermes. This was a living fossil in the history of human mysticism's development. One must know that when major secret organizations, and even the 7 Orthodox churches, held sacrifices and rituals, they often used ancient Hermes. Truly knowledgeable and humble, Klein had the same feeling as Rosal. To have achieved such merits and accomplishments yet remain calm, he truly lived up to his legendary status as Hermes. He continued to read. As I was immersed in the excitement of meeting an ancient, I heard a soft chuckle. The other person seemed to know a lot about the Hunter pathway. He said that the Hunter pathway's Sequence 3, War Bishop, after offering enough sacrifices, could pray to the origin of war, or the symbol of war, for assistance once. He said that the abilities of Sequence 3 can reflect the symbol of Sequence 0, and at the divine status of Red Priest, whoever he wants to sacrifice becomes the sacrifice, and whatever he wants to sacrifice becomes the symbol. These words silenced everyone who had spoken earlier, and even Hermes didn't refute anything. Although it sounds a bit arbitrary, domineering, and unreasonable. But I think he's right about one thing. The target a deity wishes to sacrifice can only become the sacrifice, unless the target is another deity of the same status. The Twilight Hermit Order is indeed full of capable people. This might be said by some old monster who has lived for who knows how many years. Moreover, they also possess the Blasphemy Slate, which contains complete divine pathways. This is simply cheating. Mr. Fool, who only had one profane card, looked at his makeshift group and envied the high-end, grand, and classy Twilight Hermit Order immensely. Heh, the waters of this organization are indeed not shallow. Are these important figures, these old monsters, gathered together simply because they genuinely believe in the views of the Twilight Hermit Order? That's absolutely impossible, even I don't believe it. There are definitely fanatics among them who believe in these ideals, purely waiting for the Creator to awaken, reclaim everything, and create a new world. But such people won't exceed half, and even these people aren't necessarily very devout to the convener of the gathering. At least the convener hasn't claimed to be an envoy of the Creator or anything similar. The rest are all people with their own motives, either ambitious individuals like me, or lurking traitors. It's funny to say, but apart from matters related to advancing the tide of the times, this gathering actually adopts a voting system to decide various things. Even my joining required the approval of 2/3 of the members. As expected of an organization full of old monsters, checks and balances are truly the light of civilization. This makes me much more at ease. However, when I joined, why did no one care if I recognized the ideals of the Twilight Hermit Order? And it couldn't be mentioned outside. Audience Pathway Sequence 2 Feet Discerner, Sequence 1 Foot Author. I don't know which one possesses this symbol. Sequence 0 seems to be called Visionary. Heh, this organization is so arrogant, could it possibly control the uniqueness of a certain pathway? Anyway, there shouldn't be a true God, otherwise why hide behind the scenes? I didn't think much about it at the time, and later asked about other things, such as why the word authority appears in descriptions of deities. Old Mr. Hermes gave an excellent explanation. But I appreciated another gentleman's explanation more. He said that authority is a form of a deity's existence. Seeing this, Klein wanted to continue flipping down, but the diary ended here. So what? Where was Hermes's wonderful explanation? You just leave a concluding remark, who can understand it? Too long to write. Klein at this moment was so annoyed he wanted to travel back in time, grab Rosal, and shake him until he spilled everything he knew. Of course, he remained relatively calm on the surface, without any physical gestures, just a little surprised that the Dragon Pathways Sequence 0 was not called Dragon, but rather, Visionary. There was still a small part of the diary left, with no valuable content, just some early anecdotes from Rosal. This was Emperor Rosal's first time attending an Intis aristocratic ball. He found that the young ladies and madams here were much better than he had imagined. They weren't unwashed, didn't relieve themselves freely under their skirts, or use pungent perfumes to cover strong odors. Instead, they loved to bathe, their perfumes were charming, their skin was fair and delicate, and their waists were tightly cinched. The women's appearances were generally good, and most of their figures were decent, making Rosal completely believe that unless there had been some genetic modification, he had definitely transmigrated to another world. You may begin. Klein patiently watched the great emperor's early bloopers, then waved his hand indifferently. All right, Mr. Fool. Son, Derek nodded and said, we rescued the little boy named Jack. He said he was from Enmat Harbor. This news almost proved that there was a direct connection between the mysterious Forsaken Land of the Gods and the North Continent. As long as a certain correct method was found, there was a chance to enter. Of course, Angel's method of being accidentally exiled there certainly couldn't be counted. Klein thought leisurely. Enmat Harbor is an important port in the central part of the Loan Kingdom, located east of Tingen City. It supports more than half of Backland's supplies, and even the Aurora Order has a Mr. Z, an angel, stationed there long-term. If Klein's posture was leisurely, Hanged Man, Alger, Justice, Audrey, and Magician, Furs were somewhat apprehensive. After all, no one knew whether the all-consuming darkness surrounding the City of Silver would spread and threaten the safety of the North Continent. The Chief Elder told me that when the Lord who created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God, illuminated the whole world with his glory, he was surrounded by many angels, including 8 kings who led the angels. The chief believes that Amen is the angel of time, one of the 8 kings, and the one in the mural is the angel of fate, or Ouroboros. 8 King of Angels. Audrey was a little excited to hear this. How sacred and powerful must the 8 kings closest to the Creator's throne be? Mr. Son, what are the titles and names of the other 6, King of Angels? The girl couldn't contain her curiosity. The chief didn't say, and I didn't dare to ask. Little Son said somewhat ashamed. I really want to know. Audrey subconsciously looked at Mr. Fool with longing eyes, hoping for an answer. She had already thought of the price she would have to pay for it. You look at me, but I don't know either. Klein's mouth twitched. His gaze swept over everyone in the Tarot Club seemingly unintentionally, and he shouted in his heart, Mr. Moon, aren't you a sanguine? Don't you have a long heritage? Speak up. Moon. Emlyn didn't realize the fool's expectation. This was mainly because the history of the second epic recorded by the Sanguine mainly focused on before the Sanguine ancestors' slumber and did not involve the so-called King of Angels. Shah-Ir casually added, Dark Angel, Sorcerer. Red Angel, also known as Angel of War, Medici. Wisdom Angel, White Angel, Wind Angel, and Angel of Imagination. Shah-Ir only mentioned 2 titles and names. The others, being of the same sequence, required respect for privacy. Oh, Mr. Angel knows the titles of the 8 King of Angels. Miss Justice glanced at the angel beside her with some excitement. This guy is pretty impressive. Magician, Furza's eyes drifted. Alger, on the other hand, was somewhat concerned about the ones Angel hadn't named. Fool, Klein's mouth curved slightly. He had just seen Visionary in Rosal's diary, and the Angel of Imagination here must be the King of Angels of the audience pathway. Moreover, Angel deliberately didn't mention the name, so the mastermind behind the Twilight Hermit Order seemed to have revealed itself. Moon. Emlyn felt that Angel was even more unfathomable. The information he, a dignified sanguine, didn't know, the other party actually knew. These are relatively easy pieces of information to know. For the remaining parts, it depends on luck. Shah-Ir didn't explain. Anyway, these people would eventually know. The Great Beacon of Fate would arrange everything clearly. Relatively easy. Fool. Klein's mouth twitched slightly. All right, obtaining this information was indeed not difficult. The Tarot Club quickly moved into the trading segment. The inexperienced Furs completed the Beander material transaction with Alger at the lowest price. The Abraham family earned £2,000, and she earned the shout-out, taking no commission fee. Moon. Emlyn watched the transactions one after another, and he eagerly said, Gentlemen, ladies, who knows how a sanguine can increase their strength without relying on gifts from their elders? As soon as he finished speaking, Miss Justice's eyes immediately turned to him, curiously examining this legendary vampire. Fangs, red eyes, bat wings, long lifespan, fondness for maiden's blood, an image always associated with nobility, a vampire. The gloom in Furza's heart was dispelled by the new species that emerged in the Tarot Club. Sanguine, Alger understood. Meanwhile, Derek, thinking of the image of a vampire covered in pus and fond of eating people, subconsciously reached for the axe at his waist. World, felt that he should at least react somewhat. He was almost becoming an outsider now. So why are you looking at me? Emlyn met the gazes with confusion. Was the existence of the sanguine so surprising? Why did they seem like some endangered species? At this moment, only Angel's calm reaction brought Emlyn some comfort. Everyone else was truly inexperienced. Forget it, after all, they were a group of beyonders who hadn't exceeded sequence 6. It was normal for them to be ignorant. That's right, I am a pure sanguine. Emlyn proudly raised his head. No one asked you, did they? Justice, Audrey felt this was some kind of evasive stress response. It perfectly matched the impression of arrogance, stubbornness, and prejudice in various stories. A thought flashed through Furz's mind. He curiously asked, Mr. Moon, do your sanguine divide your strong one's ranks according to human noble titles? 1. Furz recalled the sanguine counts recorded in various stories, thinking that sanguine dukes had never appeared in storybooks. No, this is you humans imitating our sanguine. As early as the second epic, we sanguine already had the divisions of Duke, Marquis, Count, Viscount, and Baron. Those who haven't mastered their own strength are underage sanguine. I am an adult sanguine. After that, one obtains a noble title, up to Duke, and the highest are the Queen and Princes. At that time, you humans were still under the rule of the giant king's court and could not possibly have invented noble titles. Emlyn's answer was resounding, and Shah-Ire almost couldn't help but applaud. As expected of an excellent young sanguine, the matter of enslaving humans and ruling the world was done by the three families together. When mentioning it, he directly omitted the sanguine and elves, letting the giant take the blame. Our city of Silver has no such records. The history of the sanguine is divided by the appearance of the first blasphemy slate. Before that, there were no clear hierarchical divisions, only vague titles such as regional leaders and family patriarchs. At the very top was the ancestor Lilith, and after that, they were strictly named according to the Beander pathway sequence system. Derek, as a human, subconsciously retorted. Moon scoffed, how long is our sanguine history? How dare a small city of Silver question our historical records? He was still wondering, where was the city of Silver? Our city of Silver never fabricates history. Our records come from verifiable ancient texts and our exploration of the darkness. Little Sun was a little aggrieved. He looked at Angel, who was leisurely counting the number of patterns on Justice's skirt. Miss Justice had been like this, neither angry nor speaking, for a long time. Chapter 244, I Am Justice. Shah-Ire hadn't expected that the debate between Sun and Moon would also involve his own affairs. The history you both possess is correct, but your manner of expression is not right, he said nonchalantly. After the angel spoke, both Sun and Moon were quite convinced. Little Sun no longer felt wronged, Big Moon looked puzzled, and Miss Justice asked with great interest. Angel, what do you mean by that? What I mean, Earth is still that Earth. Rosal's previous plagiarist was Grisha, who copied the Orthodox Church's Bible. The core philosophy of the Orthodox Church is aggregation, leaning towards collectivism, valuing spiritual pursuit over material enjoyment, and demanding absolute obedience to God Almighty. If the history of this earth is the same, then the Orthodox Church did not undergo the Reformation, nor was it influenced by humanism. A devout Orthodox Christian would absolutely have extreme fanaticism for their religion's ideology, coupled with the special social environment of the Great Bear Nation. This would create a situation where, I am justice. Such a Russian, chosen by God Almighty, would inevitably have a personality that aligns with certain geopolitical stereotypes, such as the pursuit of absolute power, an instinctive grasp of the ultimate interpretive authority over all ideologies, and a tendency to link himself with the highest faith, or to shape himself into the highest faith. The favorite slogan of the fighting nation is, our territory has no borders, naturally possessing extremely strong aggression, similar in some ways to the, under heaven, all is the king's land, from his homeland. They possess their own absolute justice, and are willing to sacrifice anything, no matter how much, to advance towards absolute justice. Shah-Ire knew this was just baseless speculation, a stereotype, but such a Russian, handpicked by Chaos C, was indeed somewhat dangerous. He didn't even believe in God Almighty. Small-mindedness. Shah-Ire scattered the chaotic thoughts in his mind and began to answer the previous question. In the second epic, the sanguine indeed had concepts of noble titles such as Duke, Marquis, count, viscount, and baron. However, at that time, the Sanguine did not use these titles to clearly delineate ranks, and humans under the rule of the Giant King's dynasty, of course, couldn't have invented these noble titles or related concepts. The City of Silver's records are also not wrong. The Sanguine did not adopt these noble titles before the first stone tablet appeared. And after the fall of the Sanguine ancestor, the Sanguine had even less interest in using some flashy titles to flaunt their status in such an environment. Shah Ayar's explanation was quite objective. The history of humans was lost during the quiet epoch, after the twin epochs, and they were long enslaved, so there was no talk of history or remembering any prehistoric civilization. However, the elves, sanguine, and giants, these nobles, among humans, did not completely lose their prehistoric civilization. The sanguine ancestor Lilith and the elf queen Gao Exaname both knew some things, it was just that the new generations of later eras were unaware. I told you, we sanguine didn't imitate you humans. Moon, Emlyn, seeing that Shah Ayar did not refute his words, immediately snorted triumphantly. Only then did he realize a problem. How did the angel know so much about sanguine history, even more clearly than he, a pure-blooded sanguine? With Mr. Fool present, the angel shouldn't be speaking nonsense, right? This question wasn't just on Emlyn's mind. Klein, Audrey, Alger, and others also thought of it. At this moment, their gazes towards Mr. Moon were a bit strange. Angel, why didn't the Sanguine use these noble titles at that time, but instead, as Mr. Sun said, still roughly divided them by region and family? Furs asked curiously. The Beander races at that time were randomly consuming Beander characteristics, and their minds were not clear. Because when the Sanguine ancestor had not fallen, the Sanguine were the favored race of God Almighty, the rulers of the world. The Sanguine's identity was naturally a symbol of nobility, there was no need to express anything extra through noble titles. Shah Ayar thought for a moment and, out of consideration for Aulunia, still spoke a few good words for his wife's clan. Moon, Emlyn listened excitedly. Seeing such a kindred spirit, he even felt like becoming sworn brothers with Shah Ayar. It was only because he remembered the current occasion that he didn't directly ask for the angel's personal information. Oh, so after the fall of the Sanguine ancestor, the Sanguine, at least those below sequence 6, were no longer considered nobles. Audrey glanced at Mr. Moon, who was excited about something, and thought so in her heart. Furs also nodded secretly, thinking, as expected of Mr. Fool's dependents, he knows so much. After that, there were some simple exchanges, such as Klein entrusting Alger to find a craftsman to make an item from the faceless Beander characteristic. The item was pre-ordered by Audrey, and Emlyn was calculating how many puppets he could buy with the money to commission Alger for a sequence 6 characteristic. At this moment, Audrey suddenly brought up, "Respected Mr. Fool, I received intelligence that the psychology alchemists originated from the Hermes ruins they excavated." Hermes was a member of the Twilight Hermit Order. Klein was surprised but still offered a reminder. The psychology alchemist's background is so deep. Audrey was equally astonished. She was somewhat relieved that she had the Tarot Club behind her, with Mr. Fool's protection, otherwise she might unknowingly fall into danger. In that case, there's something I need to remind you about. Shah Ayar was also reminded by the Fool. He turned to look at Justice beside him. A parchment suddenly appeared and then slid to Audrey's table. Audrey looked curiously. It clearly stated that Ruin Royal Family Advisor, Huon Rambus, was one of the Psychology Alchemists' Council members, codenamed Pride. What? Audrey was startled. That very gentlemanly and learned old man was actually a committee member of the Psychology Alchemists. A demigod. Audrey's reaction could not escape the notice of the others who were paying attention. Fool, Klein silently gave Angel an X in his mind. If you want to communicate privately, tell me. I'll create a shield for you. How can you be like this? This is disrespecting me, the host of this gathering. This isn't very important information. It doesn't involve you either, so I didn't make it public. Shah Ayar explained appropriately. Although this information was not important, he didn't want to say everything. Alger on the opposite side nodded in understanding. Although still a bit curious, since it didn't involve him, there was no need to force anything. If it's not important, I don't mind listening. Mr. Fool was still holding a grudge. Audrey also calmed down. She gratefully said to the angel, "Thank you for your reminder, angel. You're welcome. Consider it a supplementary gift for you." Shah-Ir waved his hand and said, "Ah." Audrey was startled, immediately thinking of her coming-of-age ceremony. "Have I been exposed?" She looked pitifully at the angel beside her. "Your dress is very beautiful, Miss Justice. It's clearly custom-made." Audrey heard the subtext and covered her face, a little embarrassed and annoyed. The Tarot Club meeting concluded here. Chapter 245, The Death God's Tomb. South Continent. The Nightmare Dragon naturally knew that Gehrman Sparrow had gone out to sea, and even knew that he had obtained the wriggling hunger from Ojik Eggers. At this moment, he was wearing a square, dark ring on his hand. This was one of the contingencies left behind by Death Salinger, a part of the key to the Death God's tomb. It was originally in the hands of Hell General Ludwell, and the Hell General was the numinous episcopate's representative supported at sea. The Pale Empress had no difficulty retrieving the Death God ring. It was something she had deliberately released, and even the powerful underworld creature harbored within the Hell General was under her manipulation and influence. This lady even felt a bit of regret that after such a long time, she hadn't been able to use the Death God ring to lure out the Son of Death, Ojik Eggers. He has already abandoned his past identity. Shah-Ir glanced at this woman, who harbored a strong killing intent, and still tried to dissuade her, as that was Klein's mentor and father after all. "You're speaking up for him. You know where he is. You've even had contact with him." Empress Shah understood the meaning of this, former teacher, as soon as she heard it. "That's not important. Let's go. I've already sensed the location of the Death God's tomb." Shah-Ir did not respond directly. He took the hand of this Pale Emperor, and vanished from the spot. The Death God Ring, a sequence 1 of the Death Pathway, residual mental traces related to death, combined with information known from the original work, and the manipulated former chief of the City of Silver's connection to the artificial Death God, so many related clues were searched for a period of time through the collective subconscious sea. The Nightmare Dragon bypassed Ojik Eggers and directly pinpointed the location of the Death God's tomb. He didn't even search for the hidden spirit world passage in the raging sea, but instead directly approached the artificial Death God's mental island through the collective subconscious sea. Even if it was only half a soul, the instinct is, life, still remained, and thus a mind world also existed. At the bottommost layer of the inverted pyramid tomb, deep within the dark mausoleum, amidst the pervasive black mist, 2 pale figures, a man and a woman, appeared atop the feathered serpent whose massive size could occupy an entire island. This feathered serpent, formed from the Death God uniqueness and existing between reality and illusion, let out a loud roar. The pale flames in its eye sockets burned fiercely, and everything turned pale. This was the extreme of decay. All spirit, will, and Beyander abilities would gradually calm, fade, and become still under this paleness. This was the authority unleashed by the uniqueness. The pale world supported by Sia Palenque Eggers, a sequence 1, was somewhat unable to withstand the erosion from the artificial Death God. In this confrontation related to authority, a mere sequence 1 still had to suffer some losses, although the enslavement attached to the death authority was directly nullified. The Pale Empress looked with disgust at the white feathers growing in the cracks of the feathered serpent's scales and the light yellow stains, feeling extreme revulsion and unwilling to touch even a bit. Simply by getting close, her mental state, which had been stabilized by the spectator, began to deteriorate again. The Death God uniqueness was clearly contaminated by the river of eternal darkness. The Pale Empress, a sequence 1 of the Death Pathway, felt it very clearly. The feathered serpent beneath her carried a distinct aura of the underworld river. The underworld river is the projection of the river of eternal darkness in the underworld. Roar. The feathered serpent roared. The summoned underworld creatures, before their physical forms could even condense, succumbed to death before the 2 pale powers. It roared uneasily, and its massive serpent tail directly struck at the two figures above, raising a strong gust of wind. Shah-Ir casually raised his hand, his right hand covered with a faint layer of golden dragon scales, and a fleeting chaotic luster appeared in his eyes. He punched the feathered serpent's head, and the entire death god's tomb shook with the immense force, causing the stairs made of various creature bones to turn to powder under the massive impact. Clang! The artificial death god was directly smashed to the ground, its previously raised head drooping limply, the pale flames in its eyes dim. The human face, identical to Ajik's, was now filled with confusion and bewilderment. The death god uniqueness was directly stunned by a single punch. It was already in a muddled state as half a soul, and now its spirit was further subjected to the special attack and critical hit from the spectator. The pale empress glanced at the male beside her, subtly taking 2 steps back. Is this the effect a sequence 1 can achieve? Knocking down an artificial death god with 1 punch. Hey, Shah-Ir chuckled, give me a hand. I'll suppress its resistance, and you use the authority of soul mastery to extract the half-soul belonging to the son of death from the artificial death god. As his voice fell, the pale flames in the feathered serpent's eyes were covered with a layer of gloom. The bronze-skinned, gentle human face showed some pain, as if it was experiencing an endless nightmare, and in the nightmare, a blood-red robe as vast as a mountain lingered. All right. The pale empress nodded, and through the authority of soul mastery, began to attempt to directly extract the target's spirit body from its physical body. Even if it failed, it could cause mental confusion and a significant decrease in vitality. Shah-Ir referenced in detail what the Evernight goddess and Klein did to the fool in the original timeline. Nightmare suppression, strong control until death. The sequence 1's authority of theft steals the characteristics within the body. The sequence 1's authority of soul separates the soul from the uniqueness. It was even simpler for Shah-Ir here. The artificial death god was still somewhat inferior to the half-mad fool. As time passed, the face of the giant feathered serpent became increasingly blurred. The pale empress was already somewhat impatient. If she really couldn't extract this half-soul, she might as well just erase it, as the final effect would be the same anyway. Patience. This half of the soul still has some use. This is a soul that has long coexisted with the death god uniqueness and the contamination of the river of eternal darkness. A very good consumable. Shah-Ir noticed Shah's emotional changes. His gaze shifted, and he looked at the woman. I still have to worry about it contaminating me in return. Although she said that, Shah obediently transformed the aspect of death into enslavement. Such a soul could indeed play a role at certain necessary times, for example, when she herself didn't want to venture into the underworld river. As for the potential negative impact on her mental state, Shah felt that she didn't need to worry about that problem for now. She had a very excellent psychiatrist by her side. Soon, after repeated failures, the Pale Empress successfully extracted half of the Son of Death's soul. The artificial death god in front of them could no longer maintain the form of the illusory feathered serpent and reverted to pure uniqueness. Shah-Ir reached out and grabbed it, and an illusory book, seemingly formed by a coiled feathered serpent, fell into his palm. Chapter 246, Death God and Door. The death god uniqueness felt acceptable to Shah-Ir. It was similar to how Klein, in the original timeline, immediately tossed 002, the Justiciar uniqueness, onto the gray mist to gather dust, but the difference was that Klein genuinely let it gather dust. The Lord of the Mysteries was completely unreasonable. Here, Shah-Ir at least needed to do some research. After obtaining the uniqueness, he and Shah did not erupt into intense conflict over it. Because this was a contaminated uniqueness, a Sequence 1 Pale Emperor couldn't possibly understand how to use it. Even if he harbored ambitions and wanted to brave various unfavorable conditions to perform a simplified God Ascension ritual, assimilating the uniqueness would be extremely difficult. The Death Pathways God Ascension ritual involves creating or merging with a true final resting place for the dead, making it the destination for all deaths in that domain. The simplified version of the ritual would at least require merging with a part of the underworld. But perhaps coincidentally, after Death's demise, the underworld underwent an anomaly. Most of the undead could no longer sense the underworld, only able to wander its periphery. The underworld's core, the city of the dead, was also affected by the river of eternal darkness. Descendants of death, even those with thin bloodlines, still faced unknown potential pitfalls. Death's Salinger had taken advantage of the ancient Death Gregory and even dismantled his former superior's resurrection contingency. Having done such things himself, he would have undoubtedly manipulated the death pathway before his death to prevent similar occurrences after his own demise. Sha might not have understood her ancestor as deeply as Sha Ayr, but she was very aware of this teacher's martial prowess. After they finished looting the tomb, there was no dispute over the spoils. Instead, they teamed up to study the feathered serpent scroll in their hands. With the death uniqueness in hand, the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death god faction became mere puppets, and the entire Numinous Episcopate fell under control. Sha Ayr could then use the uniqueness to learn more things. Backland. In a property of the Abraham family in the East Borough, accompanied by furs, Sha Ayr met with Dorian Gray Abraham, the representative of the Abraham family. The reason this meeting was delayed for so long was that Dorian, relying on the amulet Sha Ayr provided, only gained enough confidence to meet after advancing to Sequence 6. After a brief exchange of pleasantries between the three, the salty fish lady was excused. Dorian looked at the gray-eyed Sha Ayr, wanting to use his recorded spell-like abilities to test Sha Ayr's bloodline, but ultimately he didn't dare. He could only greet him politely. "Thank you, Your Excellency, for your assistance to the Abraham family. That's because I also have my own demands." Sha Ayr didn't explain anything. He took out a contract crafted by a saint-level arbiter and handed it to Dorian for him to read. The appearance of this contract made Sha Ayr's plausibility increase somewhat, as the Tamara family controlled the arbiter pathway. Sha Ayr's demeanor indeed matched an attitude of serious cooperation. "This contract is fine. As per our agreement, the Abraham family will lend the divine painting for 10 years. But we would also like to ask if there are more such amulets. You should know, this is truly very important to our Abraham family." Dorian felt relieved after reading the contract. Although the Abraham family was confident that even if only one person could successfully advance, they could restore the glory of an angel family, who would refuse more such talismans if possible. 3 years. This is a very suitable time. 3 years is enough for an experienced Abraham family to produce a secret sorcerer. Once you become a demigod, I will discuss this matter with you properly. Sha Ayr gently shook his head, his tone like a demigod relative telling his younger kin to study hard and not think about frivolous things, promising that once they got their bachelor's degree, Uncle would have arrangements. 3 years. Secret sorcerer. Dorian was convinced. 3 years wasn't long, and once he became a demigod, he would have more leverage in negotiations. As for whether he could become a demigod in 3 years, was that underestimating the foundation of a venerable angel family? If it came to an extreme challenge, even 1 year wouldn't be a problem. If one died, they'd just replace them with the next elder. This is the divine painting. After Dorian signed the contract, he carefully took out a brass frame covered in sealing runes. Its Beander ability is, "No need, I already know." Sha Ayr interrupted Dorian's introduction. He removed the ordinary oil painting from the brass frame and unfurled it towards Dorian. The content of the painting changed with his thoughts, revealing a bronze-colored door. "I have other matters, I'll be leaving now." "Oh, right, your student, it seems a relatively friendly great existence stands behind her. You can appropriately nurture her, give her a chance, give Abraham a chance." After Sha Ayr finished speaking, the divine painting shimmered, and he, along with the oil painting, vanished from the spot. Using it so skillfully, knowing it so clearly, Dorian looked at how Sha Ayr could immediately use it, and he couldn't help but feel that this was a relative of his. Appropriately nurturing that student, Dorian thought of the Yellow Light's prophecy. Nurturing her didn't seem like a big deal. He was confident that with him around, a student surpassing their teacher wouldn't happen again. When Dorian opened the door, Furs, who had already planned where to eat that evening, fell into a moment of silence as she looked at the empty room. Inside the death god's tomb, Shah-Ir gave Shah a location, and the Pale Empress immediately rushed off to deal with the disobedient leader of the artificial death god faction, Hyrtle. It was clear she had wanted to teach that old fellow a lesson for a long time. Before, she was worried about contamination. Now, with the ability to remotely control the extracted half-soul of a son of death, plus the remote suppression of the uniqueness, she was determined to at least flip over his coffin. Inside the dark tomb, faint starlight shone, and an ordinary oil painting appeared. The virtual personality directly returned. Shah-Ir waved his hand, taking the sealed artifact of level 0. It would be even better if I had that golden undying phoenix ornament. The sequence one great angel felt a slight regret, but he wasn't overly concerned. He merely wanted to conveniently conduct a small test. Death God Endure. The illusory book in his hand quickly flipped, and a projection of the Styx River emerged within the death god's tomb. As a dwelling place for the artificial death god, it was naturally connected to the underworld, and the Styx River could extend there. According to legend, the Styx River was the part of the river of eternal darkness that branched into the underworld, and they were mystically linked. And the relationship between the death uniqueness and death Salinger needed no further elaboration. The death god uniqueness is related to death Salinger and is itself polluted by the river of eternal darkness. If one is attentive, they can even see Salinger's death imprint through the death god uniqueness. Although there's no evidence, Shah-Ir always felt that even if the death god uniqueness were given to the Evernight goddess now, she wouldn't be able to consume it. It wouldn't be useful. If she were even more cautious, even keeping it for a year would just mean it sat there for a year. If it were the original timeline, and Shah-Ir were in the Evernight goddess's position, she would definitely consume the god of combat's uniqueness first. The Twilight Giant pathway is clean and hygienic, much better than this, adulterated, death god uniqueness. Once the projection of the Styx was in place, the next step was to establish a mystical connection with the river of eternal darkness. This wasn't difficult. Shah-Ir casually tossed the death god uniqueness he held into the Styx. The originally pure Styx immediately became turbid. The illusory book seemed to transform into a spring, from which pale yellow oil stains and pallid feathers continuously surged outwards. He was simulating a tributary of the river of eternal darkness, creating a directional divination environment for himself. Throwing the divine painting he held, this sealed artifact of Sequence 0, already possessing preliminary, dimension sight, and reproduction authorities, became the best divination tool. Beside Shah-Ir, an illusory Styx flowed, while on the divine painting, what was reflected was an illusory, dark, endless river. It was like treacherous weak water, nothing could submit to it, and everything would sink within it. What is the Tao? Following a question, magnificent imperial attire appeared on his body, and he wore a crown. The illusory book floating in the Styx projection transformed into an illusory jade scepter, symbolizing the death god's authority, its surface covered in pale yellow oil stains, feathers, and entwined snakes. This was an application of the spectator's fantasy comes true authority. As the divination ritual continued, what was reflected on the divine painting was not Shah-Ran, who resembled the emperor of Shando, but a middle-aged Taoist priest wearing a dark, heavy robe with many strange patterns, his face pale and bloodless, his eyes so deep black that it seemed even light would be absorbed into them. At this moment, the Taoist priest on the divine painting seemed to come alive. His deep black eyes looked over, and he stretched out a gaunt, withered hand. Seemingly wanting to grasp something, but he was blocked by a faint layer of grayish-white mist. His lips moved slightly, but no sound could be heard across the painting. However, 4 mysterious symbols still appeared in Shah-Ran's mind. The Tao permeates life and death. This is one of the spectator pathway's authorities, whatever is said, shall be known. Thank you for the teaching. Shah-Ran held the illusory jade scepter, his attire neat, his demeanor solemn, and he performed a Taoist bow towards the patriarch on the divine painting. This bow was to the Taoist lineage. The Taoist priest on the painting returned the bow, glanced at the illusory jade scepter, and his phantom gradually faded. The originally ordinary oil painting returned to its original state, and a black ghostly handprint appeared prominently on the paper, with the original oil painting also transforming into an Eastern-style landscape painting. In the painting, there were mountains and water. The mountains were yin mountains, full of graves, and the water was dead water, silent. Souls lingered, and ghostly aura was dense. The entire painting seemed to lose its luster and fell from the air. Shah Ran caught it and placed it back into the brass frame. A perfectly good sealed artifact of Sequence 0 was, without repair, effectively useless for a short period. I have been registered. After the Styx projection surrounding the death god's tomb disappeared, his fantasy comes true Emperor of Shando robe naturally vanished. Shah Ran thoughtfully held the illusory book that had changed back. The name he registered for his Taoist sect on the Western continent was definitely his real name, not the alias he commonly used here. What had he just done? It was not unlike Klein's usual death-seeking behavior. Using the death god uniqueness and a Sequence 0 sealed artifact from the door pathway, relying on the fantasy comes true authority, he set up a mystical ritual, transformed himself into the Emperor of Shando, and, relying on the correlation with the river of eternal darkness, divined the true Lord of the underworld. A fleeting glimpse, for him now, was not difficult. And peering through layers of barriers via a window, and still gaining something, establishing a certain communication, relied on the authority of, whatever is said, shall be known. Cough cough. He suddenly covered his mouth and coughed, and in his palm, some white downy feathers stained with pale yellow appeared clearly visible. Even as a Sequence 1, slightly borrowing a characteristic of the river of eternal darkness would still have an impact. Although the main backlash was borne by the magical artifact, he still suffered some effects. The Tao permeates life and death. Shah Ayar didn't mind this slight effect. On his spiritual island, he began to fantasize about the Yin Mountain talismans that the underworld Taoist had displayed. As the talismans came true, they slowly began to absorb the faint white downy feathers. Coupled with the spectator's inherent mental healing, he quickly stabilized his condition. Ultimately, pollution also depends on the person and their Beander characteristic. It's not always a matter of life and death. He didn't understand the river of eternal darkness, and there was no one here to research it. But wouldn't the Taoist sects in Shenzhou have researched it? Pollution, to some existences, is a fatal poison, to others, it is an attack or damage. If Klein could draw water from the river of eternal darkness, he could naturally use its characteristics to set up rituals. If he got serious, who wouldn't be king of kings? Holding the death god uniqueness is useless. Since I'm idle anyway, I'll refine it into a magical artifact. Shah Ayar spread open the book he held, and an illusory stream flew into the illusory book. This was a virtual personality, created using the spectator's authority. As this virtual personality, devoid of any Beander characteristics, entered the death god uniqueness, the illusory book, both inside and out, started to change. Internally, it formed a tie-in chain, and the virtual personality transformed into a feathered serpent. Externally, Yin Mountain, or rather, the Howley lineage's talismans, were inscribed, and layers of restrictions were placed upon it for his control and use. If he had a few years, he could use the Howley lineage's methods to preliminarily refine the death god uniqueness. Then, his death imprint might also become unique. This was somewhat difficult. After all, it was an authority only the death god possessed. Around the same time, Klein boarded the White Agate and began his journey through the central Sunia Sea. Leonard participated in the Hermit's Gathering in the Baba River Valley. He encountered many good things there, but due to his lack of experience, he was reprimanded by the old man. The poet-student shivered, somewhat incredulous. I'm already this careful, and they can still target me. What do you think this place is? The Marauder in the Hermit's Gathering are more complete Marauder, not the abridged versions you encounter outside. Pallas Zoroast said irritably. Alas, actually, the abridged versions are safer. He said, sighing again, as if recalling something unpleasant. Old man, What abridged version, complete version. Leonard completely failed to understand what the old man was saying. This was somewhat beyond his comprehension. Chapter 248, Spirit World Water Pump. Fourth Epic. During the First Solomon Empire, the world was generally peaceful, except for some inevitable unpleasantries between the Sun Pathway and the Death Pathway in the South Continent, but it did not escalate to the level of a god war. The gods temporarily formed a brief balance, and only the god of knowledge and wisdom was still imprisoned in the spirit world. During this time, Reborn, the dragon of wisdom, was quite uncomfortable, feeling like a small-town student facing a plagiarist. The authority of the White Tower included omniscience and analysis, but it still required some analysis. The hermit, however, was different. He represented knowledge itself from the mystical side. What the White Tower could learn with a glance, the hermit could also learn with a glance. The hermit didn't even need to understand or analyze. As long as it was clear and true mystical knowledge, he could use it. With the digestion of the civilization illuminator characteristic, knowledge from the real world was also understood with a glance. Not to mention discovery and creation, in practical application, he was the Beander of the knowledge side. Even though both the hermit and the White Tower were using each other's authority to solidify their foundations, the hermit was always a tiny bit faster than the White Tower, leading in all aspects by a small margin. Even if the difference in points per second was not much, perhaps a tiny gap like 0.12 versus 0.1, in the eyes of a true god like the Dragon of Wisdom, who could clearly perceive the difference, it was still somewhat uncomfortable. Reborn's personality was seasoned and steady. Normally, he wouldn't lose composure or become impatient even after decades or a century of waiting. However, this was under the assumption that the opponent would either lose patience or had his own calculations. The hermit, who was contending with him, seemed even more composed than him. Although he was an ancient god, after perfectly digesting the adjacent Beander characteristic, his state looked much better. Without any impatience, he focused on using the authority of the White Tower and the hermit to organize the vast, chaotic, and disorganized mystical knowledge in the spirit world. Isn't it just one knowledge emperor Beander characteristic? We can talk. Why don't you state your conditions? Reborn had been waiting for the hermit to realize that he couldn't defeat him quickly, either giving up temporarily and looking for an opportunity after allying with other true gods, or negotiating terms, paying some price to exchange for the knowledge emperor characteristic in his possession. No matter which method, it was an area the old dragon excelled in, he could calmly make arrangements. But now, the course of events didn't seem to be going that way. This hermit seemed determined to devour him, in every sense of the word. He was using the authority of the White Tower to extract various information from the spirit world. Through the assimilation of data, he wanted to assimilate the body of the White Tower. From a true perspective, the confrontation in the spirit world was not between an elf and an ancient dragon, but a pure, illusory light and a vast, illusory White Tower reaching the sky. The information ocean of the spirit world was stirred by both, and the hermit's light washed over the White Tower. These information torrents carried extremely strong decomposition properties, eroding the knowledge on the White Tower like termites. If this were not a sequence 0, but a sequence 2 wisdom angel, he would have long been decomposed into a pure information state by the hermit, and his self would no longer exist. If this were a sequence 0 plus 2 king of angels, his own knowledge would certainly be severely plundered, transforming the knowledgeable White Tower into a blind idiot. On the illusory White Tower, the thick books containing knowledge could be lost, flowing into the ocean of the spirit world, or coming alive themselves, rebelling against the shackles and restrictions of the books in pursuit of freedom. The mythical creature form of a sequence 0 could better represent its own state. So, the White Tower and the hermit at this time were like two opposing poles. The White Tower continuously imprinted and sealed knowledge, information, and words, as well as the hermit, into illusory books for preservation. The hermit continuously activated the knowledge, information, and words preserved by the White Tower, and even transformed the White Tower itself into a part of his own information state. After such a long time, Both sides had pretty much learned these displayed abilities from each other, but when choosing attack methods, they could still only choose the most primitive combat style that could maximize the effect of their own authority. If there were no external disturbances, such a conflict would continue, with both sides constantly wearing each other down. Then, even the most magnificent White Tauren would eventually tilt and collapse with a crash. The Hermit was inherently stronger than the White Tauren by a margin. This was also the spirit world. The White Tauren symbolized omniscience, while the Hermit symbolized knowledge. The spirit world is composed of countless pieces of information. The Hermit never lacks information to restore his own information flow. The surrounding information ocean is naturally his breeding ground. Although the White Tauren's omniscience is not affected by the spirit world, the White Tauren cannot analyze all the information of the entire spirit world. The Dragon of Wisdom did not want the Hermit to gain anything, because as long as the Hermit could continuously benefit from using the White Tauren's authority, his own state would improve with the continuous refinement of knowledge, which naturally conformed to the Hermit's acting principles. As long as the Hermit could gain benefits, he would not easily stop. But Reborn had no way to refuse. The Hermit's furious attack only gave the Dragon of Wisdom two paths. First, obediently use the White Tauren's authority to integrate, refine, and meticulously process the vast torrent of knowledge extracted from the spirit world. Although you gain a little less benefit than I do, both sides have positive gains. The second path was that if the White Tauren did not follow the Hermit's arrangements and acted recklessly, these forcibly instilled pieces of information would be processed without classification. Then, on the illusory White Tauren, on the layers of bookshelves, there would appear books filled with madness, chaos, and abstraction. When the number of such books reached a certain level, it would affect the White Tauren's own state. The Dragon of Wisdom would also go mad. If he were deaf, or from another pathway, he could certainly use his authority to wear down this information. But he happened to be the White Tauren. As a god symbolizing omniscience, he had to accept some of the logic inherent in this pathway. Too much chaotic information in the head leads to madness, no matter which god it is. The poor Dragon of Wisdom had no third path to take. Escape was useless, changing the battlefield was useless, an all-out counterattack was useless, and finding allies was also of little significance. Because the god of knowledge and wisdom was not facing a normal hermit, or even a normal true god or ancient god, but a deranged water pump. This was a spirit world water pump. The information bombardment he used was entirely extracted from the spirit world, with himself acting as a conduit, in a frenzied manner. This reckless fighting style would even make the fallen god wince. One must know that the hermit, an information state life, in such a situation, would experience loss, decay, error, and confusion in his core information. He should have been incredibly mad, but he suppressed the White Tauren. Chapter 249, Brother, you smell so good. Reborn felt like the damned little bastard opposite him was treating him like a donkey. Learning, scholar, knowledge, what elegant and refined words. Reading should ideally be as comfortable and inherently joyful and satisfying as sleeping, strolling on a beach, or soaking in a hot spring. But with this kind of cramming, the Dragon of Wisdom, who loved reading, felt none of his usual happiness. He felt like a robot, opening his mouth to chew on unrefined knowledge pouring down a pipe, unable to refuse, lest he drown, and unable to stop chewing, lest he choke. Although what he eventually swallowed was solid food. But before he was even ready, the other party seemed to pinpoint his limits, continuously cramming, chewing, and swallowing. Even for a true god of the White Tower pathway, multi-threading operations were basic, but this kind of cramming was truly tedious. Assembly lines are always annoying. Even Yi Tiandi, who was above the sacrificial Tao, if he returned to Earth and worked on a soul-crushing assembly line for 2 days, his state of mind would likely fluctuate. People who fight can't handle assembly lines, and the sacrificial Tao's state of mind is useless. Reborn was, of course, the same. He liked reading, but he didn't like being force-fed. As a true god of the White Tower pathway, what was the point of nurturing so many high IQ believers? Couldn't these academic talents compile the relevant knowledge into books, and he could occasionally flip through them, add a few annotations, make some revisions, and then turn it into his own? Wouldn't that be better? With so many humans on the North Continent, there were plenty of people who could do the most basic information processing work. He chose humans as his primary believers to cultivate precisely because their comprehension abilities were better than some lower-ranked dragons, and thus better able to meet his needs, wasn't it? The North Continent had no shortage of people, and you were the White Emperor, second only to one person on the North Continent. Why should I, a Sequence 0, do this garbage sorting work for you? Even an honest dragon could get angry. Especially since he had also discerned some of the Hermit's core objectives. If it was just for the knowledge Emperor Beander characteristic, they should have discussed it from the beginning. Now, he didn't even mention it. If it was just to spread knowledge and promote civilization, it would be simpler for the White Emperor to mobilize the Solomon Empire. The other party's goal was nothing more than related to the spirit world. Perhaps it was to learn from the Phoenix ancestor and open up a Death's underworld, in the spirit world, but there was no sign of that yet. Then it was to obtain a bit of authority over the spirit world through some means, and continuously increase this authority. This was absolutely possible. Better to lose together than for one to win alone. As long as I have no value, I cannot provide value to the other party. As long as I cannot provide value to the other party will not waste time on me. The miraculous wisdom of White Tower provided the best solution. The Dragon of Wisdom was very wise, but who could guarantee absolute wisdom when being stood up every day? The Hermit and White Tower weren't crazy. It was all thanks to White Tower's insane multi-threaded information diversion and the Hermit not being truly deranged enough to completely ignore things. While bullying White Tower, he also took the time to constantly update his system. Roar. With a dragon's roar, the old dragon decided to fight for himself. There was no hope of other gods helping, they were only interested in watching the show. The Dragon of Wisdom had completely had enough. First, he stopped filtering and organizing the information deluge, letting himself be washed and polluted by the chaotic information. Second, he simulated the spectator's ability, and a terrifying mental storm, accompanied by a dragon's roar, swept out. After losing White Tower's diversion, if the Hermit wanted to maintain high intensity and fully suppress a Sequence 0 of the same level, he would consume his own sanity. Coupled with attacks targeting the mental domain, even a powerful Hermit couldn't last too long. The Hermit coldly watched the disobedient Dragon of Wisdom. Was it easy for him to slowly steal and leverage the authority of the spirit world, by using White Tower's computing power and cover? And through the Worm of Time Beander characteristic he herded, and the weakened symbol from the King of Space-Time. He was constantly causing trouble for him. Go all out. Who do you think you are? I'll kill you before you go mad. The Hermit showed no signs of retreating. Although he slowed down the rate of information extraction from the spirit world, the enhanced information chain still continuously surged into the Dragon of Wisdom's body, restricting the old dragon's movements. Sha'ir temporarily reverted to his elf form, his hands glowing with golden light, like two miniature little suns. He directly initiated nuclear fusion with his bare hands, delivering a punch that brought forth the east wind, and two fists that shattered the army and dismantled White Tower. Bang! 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 The enormous Dragon of Wisdom was continuously forced back by the successive nuclear explosions before him. The Hermit combined some abilities of the Paragon pathway and the Sun pathway, exerting force from both the physical and mystical sides, and also conveniently borrowed the light of the sun in the sky, pouring a full measure of scorching heat onto the Dragon of Wisdom before him. In the eternal blazing sun's divine kingdom on earth, Osekis, who suddenly felt like he had been robbed, was somewhat annoyed. The fierce sunlight that erupted in an instant was once again stolen by the Hermit in the spirit world, and then all poured onto the fiercely resisting Hariburgen. This method of utilizing solar energy, both mystical and scientific, almost made Osekis, in his anger, shut down the sun, plunging the entire world into premature darkness. If it weren't for how embarrassing that would be, and the fact that the other party had allies, Plus he was fighting Herobergen. Osekis would absolutely not have let it go so easily. Herobergen was struggling with all his might, but he still couldn't defeat the ancient god before him, who was strengthened by the spirit world and had more Beander characteristics in his body. Both their mental states were rapidly declining. The hermit also paid the heavy price of declining sanity for the enhancement he received, but he was still single-mindedly focused on relentlessly beating White Tower. The hermit seized the opportunity, delivering a heavy, explosive punch that directly tore off a corner of White Tower. He simply shattered it with a punch, reducing it to its most basic information, and then directly absorbed this part of the information into his own system. The hermit felt this strange sense of fullness. He couldn't help but lick his lips, his gaze at Herobergen growing even more fervent. Roasted dragon meat tastes really good. Seeing that the hermit had actually eaten the Beander characteristic of the White Tower pathway, Herobergen's head, already aching from the influx of various knowledge, ached even more. This was the mystical world. Eating Beander characteristics from other pathways only increased one's burden. How could you be like an ancient god? This was an ancient god. The Dragon of Wisdom only then realized that his attempt to force the hermit to retreat by making the input-output ratio too large had failed from the very beginning. He hadn't even had time to throw out the Knowledge Emperor characteristic, and this starving, somewhat muddled, was already starting to eat White Tower. Chapter 250, The Red of Will. Why can't the White Tower be eaten? Below Sequence 1, just eat it. There will always be a chance to excrete it in the end. Above Sequence 1, if it's offered, only a fool wouldn't eat it. At most, just take a bite. At this moment, the hermit's desire for knowledge surpassed the limitations of some elaborate rituals. Could the old gods eat? Could the hermit not eat? Could the dragon of imagination eat a paragon, but the hermit couldn't eat the White Tower? At most, he would go a little mad. The great consciousness within him would have to fight first if it wanted to revive, to see which one would revive first. The hermit instantly understood. The god of knowledge and wisdom also sensed danger, and the dragon's roars became sharper at this moment. If the previous erosion was just the hermit sniffing around, still within the god's acceptable range, now the hermit genuinely wanted to eat the White Tower. Instantly, the sun in the sky dimmed for a moment. The hermit discovered that the sun had blocked him, a mystical blocking. The brightness of the sun, on the conscious side of reality, also decreased, barely better than nothing. It didn't matter. The hermit was not flustered in the slightest. He had plenty of control abilities. With a raised hand, a phantom dragon head, imbued with a dreamlike quality, appeared and bit towards Herobergen. Herobergen was very familiar with the spectator's methods. Golden light emanated from his eyes, dispelling the impure dream. The situation once again fell into a stalemate. During this, Herobergen even used the Beander ability of the Phoenix, attempting to open a door to escape the spirit world. The hermit twisted the teleportation portal's destination, grafting one end of the door to the other side of the door. The Dragon of Wisdom passed directly through the great door, and the teleportation effect was overridden. After all, he was not a true god of the door pathway. Whoosh! A lightning spear flew past, once again piercing a corner of the White Tower. The hermit devoured it completely, as if skewering a kebab. Although this damage was quickly repaired, the opponent's savage, hunting posture still made Herobergen feel somewhat uncomfortable. He felt nothing when he ate the ancient sun god, but seeing himself being eaten, he indeed felt uncomfortable. At this moment, he disregarded his dignity as a god and began to retreat strategically, relying on the spirit world, in the direction of the south continent. Influenced by the hermit, the information ocean of the spirit world began to boil. The truly mad hermit started to attempt to influence the spirit world. The Dragon of Wisdom's movements in the spirit world were against the current, yet it moved rapidly, overcoming obstacles like a carp leaping over the dragon gate. This time, Herobergen was truly fleeing, and he realized that if he didn't escape soon, things would be very bad. This was an intuition given by his prophetic ability. As long as he could escape to the vicinity of the south continent, the opponent would have to stop, because with the current separation of the North Continent and South Continent, such actions by the hermit would be considered trespassing. However, in the end, no one pursued him. The brass-colored omniscient eye directly captured the hermit's current location. He appeared above the spirit world, before the 7 pure lights that overlooked the entire spirit world. Before the 7 lights even realized what was happening, merely instinctively wary, he grasped El Moria, the red light, that was the embodiment of endless knowledge, symbolizing authority and the red of will. Mystical reenactment, Lord of the spirit world. Massive streams of information enveloped the red light. Calling it mystical reenactment was merely a simple combination of mysteries, which was the authority of enslavement from the death pathway, supplemented by the authority of steal from the thief pathway, plus a bit of mastery over the knowledge incarnation by a true god of the knowledge side. And, after grinding in the spirit world for so long, he gained a little bit of related authority. At least the red light of angel rank couldn't put up any effective struggle. He found himself losing color. The never-fading light of the spirit world actually lost a part of its color in this short time. Not only that, after his perception blurred for a moment, it was as if a bright red spear pierced towards the dragon of wisdom, which was about to leave the spirit world's area. The other 6 lights of the spirit world hadn't even reacted. As part of the spirit world, as the never-fading lights of the spirit world, they had been too comfortable for too long. The hermit had approached the most dominant of the 7 lights, the red light. They initially thought the other party might want to discuss something, such as cooperating to seal off the spirit world, or perhaps it was just a coincidence, as the 7 lights never provoked anyone, and it was meaningless for normal gods or angels to provoke the 7 lights. Yet, the red light, the strongest in combat among the 7 lights, was taken down by the opponent in one encounter. Did you really not cooperate actively? At this moment, the other 6 lights of the spirit world felt there was a problem. Red light, El Moria might be putting on an act for them. The hermit and the red light might have secretly reached some agreement long ago. Red light, El Moria was still in a daze at this time. He was enslaved in one encounter. Before he could struggle or resist, in a moment of distraction, it seemed he had agreed to something. His own light of the spirit world, knowledge incarnation, red symbolizing authority and consciousness, these symbols, authorities, and powers were taken away in part. Then he became even weaker. The opponent directly used him as a spear and thrust him out. The entire spirit world resonated at this moment. The informational hermit seemed to have performed an informational transformation on himself, adding the red light's information to his own informational form, like plugging an SSD into a host or transplanting an external arm. Red light, El Moria could feel the power of Sequence 0 surging within him like electricity or blood. This feeling made the red light almost intoxicated. A mad and powerful will, mastery over knowledge, over spiritual numbers, and even over a portion of the spirit world's authority. All of this made red light, El feel so good he wanted to scream. A strong will always submits to an even stronger consciousness. Authority can only be fully enjoyed when unleashed. So, let's charge forward uninhibited. Whoosh! The red radiance instantly surpassed the other 6 lights, almost dominating the entire spirit world. The spirit world's barriers were reinforced by this radiance imbued with strong will. The red spear caused the spirit world's spirits to tremble and shiver. This scene startled all the other gods who had been lurking. The spirit world's pump operated at high speed. When the hermit replaced the red light's position, displayed the red light's authority and symbolism, and used this spirit world authority, how conspicuous would this red radiance be? The crisis of death suddenly descended. The god of knowledge and wisdom, Reborn, without even thinking, directly threw the knowledge emperor characteristic in the opposite direction, applying a force to manipulate the knowledge emperor characteristic to quickly move away, hoping to divert some of the hermit's attention. However, the red radiance did not waver in the slightest, carrying a strong personal will, steadfastly piercing through the dragon of wisdom. Chapter 251, The Purity Light Brotherhood. It was like challenging the Black Emperor in his own domain, or fighting death to the death in the underworld. When the hermit went mad, even the other deities couldn't sit still. The mysterious sun and the lightning storm jointly broke into the spirit world. The eternal blazing sun and the Lord of Storms couldn't help but intervene from afar to pull back the dragon of wisdom. If Reborn was severely injured, and the fallen god and the Black Emperor joined the hermit in an all-out assault, this old dragon might be devoured by these factions. The eternal blazing sun and the Lord of Storms found this unacceptable. The attacks of the two Sequence Zeros did not shake the hermit's resolve. A red light swept across, stirring up strong fluctuations in the spirit world. The hermit directly appeared before the dragon of wisdom, holding a red illusory scepter. Half of his robe was stained red as he swung a slash towards Reborn. The old dragon, injured, retreated in a panic, using the cover of his two old comrades to withdraw from the spirit world and return to the real world. The hermit did not pursue. He turned to glance at the direction where the Knowledge Emperor Beander characteristic had disappeared. After a delay, it had long since drifted to an unknown location under the influence of the Dragon of Wisdom. He could have given up attacking the Dragon of Wisdom just now and turned to pick up that Knowledge Emperor Beander characteristic, but he couldn't control himself. The craving to implement his own will directly surpass the desire for the Beander characteristic. Did they think throwing a bone would make him stop? As if he lacked that one Beander characteristic. Ultimately, it was just a Beander characteristic. Not experimenting with a new authority was what truly felt uncomfortable and would leave him feeling restless. At this moment, gazes from outside the spirit world were cast over. The hermit snorted coldly. All gazes below true gods, including those of the King of Angels, were shattered by the brilliant red light. Above the spirit world, the other 6 purity lights each projected illusory human figures. They appeared as 6 old men wearing robes of different colors. These other 6 purity lights, looking at the hermit's red-stained robe and the illusory scepter in his hand, showed expressions of worry, vigilance, or indifference. Indeed, even the authority of a god could be stolen, let alone the 7 lights of the spirit world, which, while special, still had some gap compared to deities. The authority of the light of the spirit world, in the eyes of other Sequence Zeros, seemed to be merely icing on the cake. But the hermit before them seemed to be the very deity who could perfectly unleash this spirit world authority. What to do? We can't defeat him at all. Even all 6 of us together. The 6 purity lights fell silent in unison, sensing the troublesome nature of the situation. The hermit ignored them, waving his arm as if brushing off his sleeves. An illusory old man, wearing a crimson robe and with a blurred face, appeared in the spirit world. This was precisely Ire Moria, the Red Light. He shared a similar name with Shah Ire, and his honorific name was also somewhat close. When he was replaced, he was basically unable to put up any effective resistance. Part of his authority and symbols were stolen, staining the hermit's white robe red, and part of his essence was suppressed, transforming into the illusory scepter in the hermit's hand. Now, the hermit was the red light in mysticism. You, with your consciousness incarnated as a human, go to the Solomon Empire and promote the development of knowledge. The authority and symbols of the red light will be temporarily wielded by me until I wish to change it. Without waiting for Ire Moria to recover, the hermit issued an order. Ire Moria instinctively frowned, but a red light flashed, and he ultimately bowed in salute. As the red light, symbolizing authority and will, when authority changed hands and the other party's will was overwhelmingly strong, temporary obedience seemed like a good choice according to his innate nature. Moreover, descending to the real world with his consciousness to teach humans also seemed somewhat interesting. As for you all, I believe appropriate communication is a ladder to promoting civilization's development. The hermit glanced at the other 6 lights, and his figure gradually faded. In the sky of the spirit world, the significantly thicker red light completely overshadowed the radiance of the other 6 lights. The hermit, as a life form in an informational state, was like a fish, temporarily dwelling in the river named Red Light. The existence of this fish, in turn, connected to the vast ocean, expanding both the width and depth of the Red Light river. The illusory Ire Moria glanced at the thicker, larger, and stronger red light, and inexplicably puffed out his chest with pride. Without another word, he descended to report to the White Emperor's court. The other 6 lights generally felt that their current situation was rather unfavorable, as if a master had moved into their home. Not only did they have to serve him well, but they also had to constantly worry about their chastity, as this master seemed a bit mad. If they dared to resist, they might even get beaten. You can't just watch him do whatever he wants in the spirit world, can you? The old men formed by the 6 purity lights cast expectant gazes towards the many deities observing the scene. Those gazes confirmed that this ancient god seemed to be following certain instincts, temporarily dwelling within the red light and having no intention of emerging. One by one, they withdrew their gazes. Unless necessary, they did not want to provoke the hermit, who had a bit of a storm about him, as there was not much benefit. The other deities' unwillingness to intervene left the purity lights somewhat numb. Their status was actually only angel, at most a special kind, not reaching the sequence 0 level. In the past, they were naturally the never-fading lights of the spirit world. But now, it seemed a being had truly arrived who could replace them. The 7 lights were eternal, but that didn't mean the 7 lights couldn't change their names. Even the will of an outer deity could be shattered, like a certain demon of knowledge, let alone the 7 lights. The 7 lights were merely immortal, not immune to madness. In the world of mysteries, as long as consciousness existed, all things could go mad. Should we also go to the real world? Seraphis, the green light, with an artistic hairstyle, suggested. If they had to serve someone anyway, why not serve the more emotionally stable White Emperor in the real world? As for the hermit, if he wanted to try out the authority of the other 6 lights, resisting would only lead to a beating, followed by suppression and direct theft. In that case, it would be better to lie flat and let him study them. After all, the hermit's instinct was merely to study. Even if he were to consume the White Tower, he wouldn't truly consume the 7 lights. I'll go too. Veneton, the yellow light, whose traits were rationality and adaptability, was the first to agree. He also felt that temporarily leaving to avoid trouble was a good idea. The hermit wasn't always mad, it wasn't shameful to avoid him when his state was worse. Then let's go. As 7 brothers, we should go to the real world together, complete and intact. Moreover, we previously had to be careful of certain unwritten rules when we wanted to interfere with the real world, not causing too much commotion. But now, you can't blame us, we are being expelled to the real world. Hilarion, the most outgoing and cheerful, orange light, said with a laugh. Chapter 252, Spirit World Administrator, or Spirit Official for short. The consciousnesses of the 7 lights of the spirit world all went to the real world to report, while their physical entities, remaining in the spirit world, were essentially in an idle state in a sense. This meant that without needing any permissions, the hermit could, according to his preferences, pluck the desired colors and symbols from the other 6 lights, then apply them to himself to fulfill his various needs. The 7 lights each symbolized different domains. If the Lord of the Mysteries was the pillar of the spirit world, then the 7 lights should be its different classifications and sub-projects. They are auxiliary products of the spirit world, their existence intimately tied to it. It's hard to say how much spirit world authority they wield, but they surely possess some ability to manage and utilize the spirit world's power. In the hermit's rigid perception, there is nothing in this world that cannot be stolen. If the 7 lights could utilize the power of the spirit world, then the hermit could too. As the hermit progressed step by step from stealing, copying, learning, to creating, his authority naturally extended to the spirit world, and parts of his symbolism naturally intersected with the spirit world. North Continent, Trier. Constantine Palace. The White Emperor's fingers lightly tapped the armrest of his throne. Although the Lord of the Mysteries was the pillar of the spirit world, the White Emperor still felt that the Lord of the Mysteries was quite pure, and the Heavenly Venerate's symbolism was not wrong. The Heavenly Venerate was not the Lord of the spirit world, the Heavenly Venerate was the ruler of the spirit world. What is the essence of the spirit world? It is related to spirituality, spirit bodies, spirit numbers, information, and many other aspects. If one straightforwardly considers the spirit world as a database, the Lord of the Mysteries is the ruler of the spirit world. He is not data, nor does he symbolize data. He symbolizes access, deletion, addition, connection, these substantive operations, targeting data. This seems to align with the superficial meaning of the ruler of the spirit world symbolism. In the White Emperor's personal understanding, the Lord of the spirit world should have multiple intersections with the spirit world, rather than focusing more on operations. Although ruler of the spirit world and Lord of the spirit world actually don't differ much in meaning, the Lord of the Mysteries being the pillar of the spirit world is the most practical aspect. And the current situation is that the group owner of the spirit world chat group has been reported and banned due to uncivilized remarks. The 7 administrators have limited authority. The original 7 lights of the spirit world might have been more awe-inspiring, but due to certain restrictions, the 7 lights of the spirit world do not extend to the vast spirit world beyond Earth. They might not even have the authority to contact the spirit world of the Western continent, and the spirit world of the East continent has also been shattered. This makes the position of the 7 lights of the spirit world somewhat awkward. If they could normally become the 7 lights of the entire cosmic spirit world, they should at least be beings at the King of Angels level. Going a step further, with the 7 lights working together, even the level of a King of Kings of Angels might be possible. But the 7 lights of the spirit world were banned. They are merely the 7 lights of the spirit world related to the north and south continents of Earth and the 5 great oceans. They simply cannot exert the true authority of administrators. The Hermit, however, is different. The Hermit is a sequence 0 level deity. The Hermit's mythical creature form naturally has a certain degree of compatibility with the existence state of the spirit world. The Hermit also possesses a sequence 1 worm of time characteristic, which grants him partial operational authority over the spirit world. When the Hermit truly completes his initial accumulation of knowledge, why couldn't he synthesize the power of this part of occult knowledge into a weakened version of the Lord of the spirit world symbolism? Imbuing numbers with power, granting them truly meaningful, distinct symbolic powers, albeit significantly diminished from the original, is one of the Hermit's core authorities. Then, going a step further than numbers, truly preparing the various occult knowledge needed to form a symbol, activating this knowledge, and combining it into a weakened version of symbolic power, isn't that also within the Hermit's authority? The ruler of the spirit world is absent, why can't I become the Lord of the spirit world? The White Emperor looked at the 7 lights of the spirit world bowing to him in the Great Hall, and this thought suddenly popped into his mind. It sounded somewhat absurd, but it truly felt feasible. As long as there is no ruler of the spirit world, then the one who influences the spirit world most deeply is the Lord of the spirit world, the Lord revered by all spirits in the spirit world. The Western continent surely also has a spirit world. Those responsible for managing the spirit world couldn't be the 7 lights, could they? They obviously also have their own spirit officials. This, in essence, seems to be the same principle. Thinking this way, even the position of Vice Emperor of the Solomon Empire began to feel a bit dull. In what way do you wish to operate in the real world? The White Emperor had been silent for a long time when his White Empress, Aulunia, asked. The beauty goddess was in a rather pleasant mood now, never expecting that one day, the 7 lights of the spirit world would come to audience her. We don't need any special status. We just wish to operate as scholars or royal consultants. Red Light exchanged glances with his 6 brothers. They had no intention of fully integrating into the framework of the Solomon Empire, nor did they like any noble titles of a human empire. Being a royal consultant felt quite good. Your talents are universally recognized. I have very high expectations for you, and I also understand that as the 7 lights of the spirit world, you are not only familiar with all kinds of knowledge related to the human world and human civilization, but you also possess your own system of knowledge. Knowledge should be free, without boundaries. I am having you take human form not to make you think like humans, to develop human technology, or to research human life. My expectations for you lie in other areas. Shah-Ir slowly spoke, looking at the 7 lights. As he spoke, the eyes of these 7 elders grew brighter and brighter, and for a moment, they even felt as if they had met an enlightened sovereign. Creating an academic atmosphere in the Solomon Empire, establishing schools in various places, and encouraging the development of science and technology are things ordinary people need to do, or rather, they are the inevitable fulfillment of my will. Your mission is to explore new possibilities. The hermit's adjacent pathway is the paragon. I also have the most superficial understanding of the sequence 0 paragon. The paragon represents civilization, but the definition of civilization should not be superficial. Is it only human civilization that can be called civilization? Are the civilizations of other life forms not worth recording? What kind of unique splendor would the civilization of spirit world beings be? Prove it to me, you 7 wise ones from the spirit world, who have taken human form. Reality and the mystical should not be 2 independent dividing lines, they can run in parallel without conflict. I want to see more things that make me feel novel and surprised. I can even give you some references. The White Emperor smiled slightly, proactively uploading some interesting settings from the first epic that combined the mystical and reality, which had appeared in some films or literary works, to the spirit world. In the eyes of the 7 lights, the image of the tyrant unknowingly became lofty. Chapter 253, Magical Constructs. A fusion of mysticism and reality, which I call magical constructs. After the White Emperor, Shah-Ir, uploaded the basic concept to the spirit world, some modern mechanical structures appeared in his hand. These structures were inscribed with mystical runes, and several spirit bodies were placed into the turrets formed by the constructs. 3 muzzles flashed with the light of wind, thunder, and fire respectively. Combining mysticism with reality to jointly advance the development of civilization, making wars for low and mid-sequence beyonders more interesting, and creating a new type of tool more widespread than sealed artifacts, this is the path I intend to promote. Mysticism and reality, knowledge and spirituality. Shah-Ir picked up an ordinary bow and arrow, on which sacred purification runes were inscribed, creating a simple enchanted bow. He threw the mobile turret and the enchanted bow and arrow in front of the 7 lights, smiling at the top scholar. Do you understand? Research what you like, do what you want, but pay attention to the fusion of reality and mysticism, and likewise, do not violate the laws of the Solomon Empire. We obey your will, your majesty. Red Light Ir Moria was still the first to bow, and the other 6 lights followed closely. At this moment, they actually did not resist the White Emperor's arrangements at all. Staying in the spirit world all the time was quite boring. Now that His Majesty allowed them to pursue their interests, why would they be eager to return to the spirit world to continue their imprisonment? You should first research several magic reactor cores to achieve the collection and storage of various energies like light and electricity. Once the energy problem is solved, the remaining system built upon energy can develop and spread rapidly. Shah-Ir thought for a moment and added, although he had some issues with the all 5 families and the 3 devious families, it was indeed necessary to first accumulate enough academic credits from the 2 knowledge pathways. Promoting the Industrial Revolution and inventing steam engines was too slow, he wouldn't compete with old Huang for that. He would just skip ahead. Your Majesty, rest assured, this is not difficult. Give us some time, and we will solve the energy problem. But, Yellow Light Weniden showed an inquiring expression. For the 7 lights, technology was never an issue, but utilizing solar energy, electrical energy, and perhaps wind and water energy might involve the eternal blazing sun and the Lord of Storms, especially the eternal blazing sun. This one is the actual sun of Earth. It's fine. Once the relevant products are made, they can be sent to the Eternal Blazing Sun Church and the Storm Church for evaluation. If the magic reactor cores you create can bear the power of the Sun pathway and the Storm pathway, or accelerate the collection of various energies through spirituality, I believe the Eternal Blazing Sun Church and the Storm Church will not necessarily stand against us. The White Emperor's emotions remained stable. Although he himself was not incapable of doing these things, it was more suitable for the 7 lights to do them. As long as it was within his framework, under his influence, he would enjoy the largest share of the final results. After receiving permission, the Seven Lights no longer had any qualms. After bowing to the White Emperor, they exited the hall. They were already eager to claim their respective special funds. Red Light also carried away the 3-barreled cannon that Shah Ayar had crafted by hand, feeling that such a creation perfectly matched his personality. Purple Light, on the other hand, subtly picked up the enchanted arrows, seemingly having already gained relevant inspiration. Now, the hall fell silent. Beauty goddess Aulunia looked at the handsome profile of the elf. She leaned on his shoulder and said with certainty, "Your preemptive layout of the Paragon pathway is a very good plan. But, Solomon might control your progress." Aulunia naturally also hoped that Shah Ayar could become a dual pathway true god as soon as possible. She also strongly supported Shah Ayar's decision because such development indeed showed promise. However, the White Emperor cannot ignore the Black Emperor. Because the Black Emperor will not ignore the White Emperor. The Hermit can prepare in advance to accommodate the uniqueness of the Paragon. The Black Emperor is also preparing to accommodate the uniqueness of the Justiciar. Solomon naturally cannot obstruct Shah Ayar's arrangements to advance and develop civilization. If the Black Emperor dares to disrupt the White Emperor's civilizational development, the White Emperor can smash the Black Emperor's order construction. These two are both cooperative and antagonistic. During the normal preparation phase, neither side will interfere with the other. But if the White Emperor already intends to accommodate the uniqueness of an adjacent pathway, and the Black Emperor has not yet prepared or obtained the Justiciar uniqueness, then obstruction will certainly come. If the White Emperor truly gains the upper hand, the Black Emperor, as the current emperor, might have to worry about the Solomon Empire changing its name. The situation on the North Continent is like this now, it's quite stable, but also quite stable. It doesn't matter, time is on my side. Shah Ayar waved his hand dismissively. He wasn't competing for immediate gains or losses, nor was he anxious about speed. Anyway, in this era, no one could surpass him in the two knowledge pathways. And regarding the collection of high-sequence Beander characteristics for the Paragon pathway, could anyone surpass the ruler of the North Continent world, the Hermit, the Paragon, the mixed characteristic, Ancient God, the actual controller of the Moses ascetic order? It doesn't exist. If becoming a god first couldn't block those who became gods later, that would be a joke. Obtaining the uniqueness of the Paragon pathway is only a matter of time. As time passed, primordial demoness Cheek finally gathered all the conditions for becoming a god. Including, true love originating from herself. When Shah Ayar arrived at the demoness divine kingdom, again, frankly speaking, he was a little surprised. Because when they first met, Cheek's reflection in the mirror was male, and a male who was incredibly obsessed with Cheek's body. And now, Cheek's reflection in the mirror had become female. Not only had she become female, but the Cheek in the mirror also gave Shah Ayar a seductive smile, her smile so alluring, yet the disdain and scorn in her eyes were so malicious. Inside and outside the mirror, her expressions seemed to be exactly alike. "You, fellow, indeed only think of yourself." Seeing Cheek like this, Shah Ayar immediately understood. This fellow didn't love him. Perhaps it was because he got along well with Aulunia, didn't come here to build up affection, and didn't even visit Cheek much. This old brother resolutely chose self-love. The demoness fell in love with Cheek, this was true love. Whether it was her male self or her female self, the demoness loved them both. Only then could she reconcile with the male reflection in the mirror, their intentions becoming one, sharing a single consciousness, eliminating any possibility of harm during advancement. Self-reconciliation is also an advantage for males walking the demoness pathway, females are slightly at a disadvantage. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.